Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. So I'm really excited to have back on the show again, theologian and scholar and fellow Irishman, Robert Boylan. Robert, good to be back with you.
Thanks again for having me on. Last time was fun, so I'm hoping this time it'll be fun and informative again.
Yeah, we had a really good discussion last time. We looked at, was Joseph Smith a modalist between 1829 to 1834?
Spoiler alert, he wasn't.
Yes, yeah. So you kind of went through, the passages that critics would point to. We had a look at other passages that sort of contradict this theory. So I think you could say that it was a bit of a debunking, or at least if he was a modalist or held a Trinitarian view, he was not consistent. I think that was the conclusion, and critics, they only present maybe those things that support their theory, but either intentionally or unintentionally don't show the things that might go against it. But it was a really good discussion, so people should go back and check that out. And Robert, he knows his stuff really well. So tonight we're going to be discussing sort of another controversy, another part of Joseph Smith's first vision that can cause a lot of people to sort of be confused. A lot of critics would point to this. Was it the Father and the Son that appeared to Joseph Smith, as we've been taught in the traditional narrative? But there's some accounts from, Joseph Smith's family members and even from some early church leaders where they talk about that it was actually the angel Moroni that appeared and, told Joseph Smith, which church to join, and, he was forgiven of his sins. And when you look at some of those quotes, it might seem that was that actually the first vision? And then Joseph then in his later accounts talking about the visitation of the Father and the Son, was that like a later embellishment or a change in the story? And critics would sort of take that conclusion that, oh, he's just changing things, but originally it was the angel that appeared to him. That's what he was telling everybody. So we're going to be having a discussion about that, and Robert's done a lot of research. So we're going to be going through looking at sort of like the wider context and sort of like addressing a lot of these things. So I think this is going to be a really good discussion. Anything you want to say about Robert before we jump in?
No, I think that's a very good general overview. The first thing we'll be discussing, of course, is I'll be making the case that at least implicitly, in a very strong way, there's attestation to the first vision pre-1832. But in the second part, we will be discussing, did Brigham actually teach an angel only appeared to Joseph? It was not the Father and Son. Why was there conflation by William and Lucy at times about the first vision of Moroni and the first vision in 1820 and things like that? So
Yes.
hopefully, even if you're a critic of the church, you will actually come out and at least admit that a better case can be made for the historicity of the first vision than many believe it to be.
Okay. Right. Yeah. No. Good points. So I'm excited for us to dive in and to talk about these quotes and to look at the wider context.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen.
No problem.
So, and I'm just going to close my video. And just make sure you can actually see this.
Yes. Yeah. I can see that.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm just going to minimize you, and feel free to interject whenever you want to, but this will be like part one of the two-part of the presentation. So, attestation of the first vision in the Book of Mormon and section 20 of the Doctrine and Covenants. I also have a brief note at the end of JST Psalm 14, which may be of interest. So, in 2 Nephi 27, verses 24 to 26, there's a prophecy of how Christ would actually appear and speak to the then future translator of the text. So even proceeding from, say, a naturalistic or supernaturalistic explanation for the text, we have this following prophecy concerning its translator. And again, it shall come to pass that the Lord shall say unto him, the translator of the text, that shall read the words that shall be delivered him. For as much as this people draw near unto me with their mouth and with their lips do honour me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear towards me is taught by the precepts of men, therefore I will proceed to do a marvellous work among this people, yea, a marvellous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise and learned shall perish, and the understanding of the prudent shall be hid. Now, if you're familiar with the different accounts of the first vision, this is actually, in many respects, not just the 1832, but the 1838 account of Jesus' words to Joseph Smith. So in this passage, or this pericope, the which is in many respects, it's a prophetic reworking or a midrash of sorts of Isaiah 29, something that's been discussed by a lot of LDS scholars over the years, of the future translator, because in Nephi's prophecy, the simile of a book is actually a real book, and there's a number of other things as well, but the translator of this real book, i.e. the Book of Mormon, will actually receive this vision from the Lord, and in context, this is about Jesus. Now, in terms of, say, the textual tenacity of this passage, this is how it appears in the extant printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon, page 87, and it's more or less appears as it does in current printings of the text. A few words have been like modernized, like as much and stuff like that, but be it as may, there's no substantial change to the text. It remains with the same meaning.
Right.
So here in this passage, Nephi, or if you even believe it's just Joseph Smith in a naturalistic explanation, prophesies of how the then future translator plates, who would be Joseph Smith, will be told by the Lord himself the words of verse 25. Now this is significant as it records, one, a theophany of the Lord, i.e. Jesus, and theophany is just the technical theological term for an appearance of a deity. It can be God, it can be Jesus. A Christophany, by the way, is the theological term for an appearance of Jesus. So the prophet Joseph, or at least the translator of the marvelous work and wonder. And two, the words of verses 25 to 26 are quotations from, or paraphrases of, Jesus' very own words in both the 1832 and 1838 accounts of the first vision. Now, with respect to the latter, note Joseph Smith History 19 in the Pearl Grey Price, which is perhaps the most well-known account of the first vision we have. I was answered that I must try none of them, for they were all wrong, and the personage, i.e. Jesus, who addressed me, said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they draw near to me with their lips, but their heart are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. So, in Jesus' words, as recorded in the 1832 account, read as follows. And he, Christ, spake unto me, saying, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee. Go thy way, walk in my statutes, and keep my commandments. Behold, I am the Lord of glory. I was crucified for the world, that all those who believe on my name may have eternal life. Behold, the word lies in sin at this time, and none do it good, no, not one. They have turned aside from the gospel and keep not my commandments. They draw near to me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and mine anger is kindling against the inhabitants of the earth, to visit them according to their ungodliness, and to bring to pass that which had been spoken by the mouth of the prophets and apostles. Behold, and lo, I come quickly, as it is written of me in the cloud, clothed in the glory of my Father. So what's the significance of this pericope? And for those who are wondering, a pericope is the term for a self-contained unit of scripture. One, it is the earliest account of the first vision in print. 2 Nephi 27 would have been dictated in 1829, and according to John W. Welsh, it would have been June 20th, 1829. Even if one were to reject the Book of Mormon's authenticity, this has Joseph Smith, or at least the future translator of the plates, himself telling the reader about a Christophany, i.e. appearance of Jesus, in 1829. Two, the focus of the vision is the bringing about a marvelous work, i.e. the Book of Mormon, and the establishment of the church and the spread of the gospel. See how marvelous work is used in the Book of Mormon in 1 Nephi 14:7, 22:8, 2 Nephi 25:17, 29:1, 3 Nephi 21:9, 28:2. So critics cannot claim that the motivation mentioned in the 1838 account is a later invention or novelty, or that the 1838 account is a motivated reworking of the 1832 account to deal with the then contemporary challenges Joseph Smith was facing with respect to, say, church leadership and other things like that. Now, my friend Tanner Johnson actually pointed this out to me in October 2019, and I think it holds pretty well. As an aside, marvelous work in the Book of Mormon, it's not simply the Book of Mormon, it's the Book of Mormon and the church or some other organization used to establish the gospel among the Gentiles and the Jews. There's a number of passages. For instance, 2 Nephi 29:1, which is in the context of this passage. But behold, there shall be many at that day when I shall proceed to do a marvelous work among them, that I may remember my covenants which I have made unto the children of men, that I may set my hand again the second time to recover my people, which are of the house of Israel. So there's not just a scriptural text and passage, there's a corporate entity here, the establishment of a church or the new Israel, that will be the result of this prophecy. And marvelous work appears in a few other passages as well in the Book of Mormon. I'll just let people looking at this.
Oh yeah, it's kind of mentioned throughout, isn't it?
Yeah, and this actually has been picked up by a few LDS. I mean, Tanner pointed out this to me in October 2019. I shared it with a few others, and they actually thought it holds up pretty well. In one random LDS book I read for a different project, Alan Neal, Book of Mormon Prophecies for Our Day, he actually picks up this as well, tying it into Isaiah 29 as well as the first vision. So there's other LDS as well who believe this to be, in some respects, a prophecy of the first vision. So
it's interesting because I've read that passage before in D&C 27, and yes, I noticed the similarities between, you know, they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, and how that's, you know, similar if not identical language to what the Lord says to Joseph Smith in his both 1838 and 1832 account. But I never noticed, that first part where it says that the Lord will say this to the translator.
Yeah.
If you go back to the verse, and it shall come to pass that the Lord shall say unto him. So this is like a prophecy of what the Lord will say unto pretty much whoever brings forth
Yeah.
this book, the translator of the book, which I've never noticed that before, as like a prophecy of the Lord appearing and conversing with Joseph Smith.
Mm-hmm. And also, it borrows from the verbiage of the 1832 and 1838 accounts. And as we shall see at the end of this, JST Psalm 14, which would be contemporary with the 1832 account of the first vision. So I just thought I'd point that out. Again, my thanks to Tanner Johnson for pointing this out. But if his approach to this holds up, and I think it does, at the very least, we have a pre-1830 here, 1829, June 1829 account of there being some appearance of the Lord, i.e. Jesus, to Joseph Smith.
So, and maybe Joseph Smith, although the first vision, if you believe it happened in 1820, it would have already happened to him. But you wonder when he translated this verse, if he knew that was like a fulfillment of the prophecy, or he was just translating the text and wasn't even aware. But yeah, whenever you look into it, it does seem like a prophecy of the Lord appearing and saying those things to Joseph Smith.
Yep. And again, like as with the modalism discussion last time, I mean, you don't even have to hold to a supernatural view of the Book of Mormon's origins to accept that this is some type of prediction in the text. So it begs the question, when was it fulfilled? And be it as it may, you do have, like, if you think it's Joseph making a poll call, you have Joseph addressing himself as the future translator of the plates, supposedly having this prediction that the Lord would actually speak to him, and then interestingly use the verbiage of the 1832 account and the 1838 account, respectively 3 and 9 years before he would actually write them down. So he's clearly not, although the 1832 account did appear because of contemporary concerns, and the 1838 account did appear in respects because of contemporary concerns, that doesn't explain at all. It's not like, say, a pure invention. There's like pre-existing issues going on as well, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, that makes sense.
Cool. Any questions about that, or do you want me to address this passage?
No, I think I think what you said as well. Like, even if you hold a naturalist view that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, if he did, then he wrote in a prophecy of the Lord appearing to him and telling him, they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. So he's referring to his first vision experience, even if he made it all up. He's referring to it in the Book of Mormon, so it wasn't just a later invention when he told his first vision accounts.
Yeah, and all the more so when we're told by like Dan Vogel and others that there's quote unquote predictions in the Book of Mormon, like say the 3 and 8 witnesses that Joseph self-fulfilled, if you will. So where's the self-fulfillment of this if there's a purely naturalistic explanation? And it's not simply like a born-again experience. It's actually a vision here.
Yes.
So I think that's pretty important. Want me to go on to this passage now?
Yeah, I think before you read it, this one, I know, well, maybe we can read it first and then I'll say what critics might say about it. I will read it first.
Yeah, sure. This is section 20, verses 5 to 6, and the language of manifestation. Evidence of a pre-18 theophany, i.e. appearance of God, in section 20 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which was written April of 1830. So, again, pre-1832.
Yes.
Now, in section 20, verses 5 to 6, we read, after it was truly manifested unto this first elder, that is Joseph Smith, that he had received a remission of his sins, he was entangled again in the vanities of the world, but after repenting and humbling himself sincerely through faith, God ministered unto him by an holy angel, whose countenance was as lightning, and whose garment were pure and white above all other whiteness. Now, many Latter-day Saints have argued that in this text we have an early allusion to the first vision. There's been a lot written about this, but I wish to focus on verse 5's use of manifested. Now, what is important about this is that this is the language of theophany, i.e. an appearance of God, whether of Jesus and or the Father. Now, we see this in both the King James New Testament, which clearly did influence the theological language and worldview of Joseph Smith, and the Book of Mormon, showing that this concept was part and parcel of Joseph Smith's theological vocabulary prior to 1830, adding further plausibility that this to this being an allusion to a theophany, i.e. the first vision. So,
right. No, I know. So I'm going to put on my critical hat here. I know a critic would maybe interpret that. And we know critics like maybe Dan Vogel and others might believe that this verse, it was manifest unto him that he received a remission of his sins. He
like a
might
born
thought that
again
Joseph
experience,
had
but
it,
something more nebulous.
years earlier, a born again experience, and maybe he felt, a spiritual manifestation that his sins were forgiven, but that it doesn't mean that it was God and Jesus that appeared to him, and that it was the Lord that forgave him of his sins.
Basically, the TLDR version of that would be this is recording some prior to the appearance of the angel, i.e., pre-September of 1823, but it's a much more nebulous event, like a born again experience. It's not like, say, a heavenly manifestation that like Latter-day Saints like myself believe happened.
But it definitely refers to that he received remission of his sins before the angel visited himself, because after repenting, humbling himself sincerely, then God ministered to him by an angel. So there was some sort of a remission of sins experience. And some critics would say, oh, it was a born again experience, whereas we believe, oh no, that was when the Lord appeared to him and forgave him of his sins, as he talks about in the 1832 account.
Well, the critics are half right. It was some type of experience where he was received a remission of sins, but as we'll see, like if you look at manifest and manifested in Joseph Smith's vocabulary up to this time, it's not consistent with a nebulous born again experience merely. It's actually an appearance of God. And for instance, now this is how the text appears in Revelation Book 1, page 53. So again, there's no issues when it comes to the text of this passage. I just throw that out for critics who might say like it was a reworking. It's not. So, for instance, in 1 Timothy 3:16, and I'll be quoting from the King James because that, of course, was the Bible Joseph used. It would have informed his vocabulary. In 1 Timothy 3:16, an early Christological confession according to most scholars, we read, "And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory." Now, this is speaking actually about Jesus, not God the Father. But notice how it was, God was manifested in the flesh. This is about the incarnation, that is the physical appearance of Jesus on the earth, not some kind of nebulous experience. And that's from the King James. I do note, if you're reading like a modern translation, it's going to read a bit differently. It will say he who instead of God. The difference between theta sigma, os, which means he who, and theta sigma, omicron sigma, I should say, and also theta sigma, which is, it's called a nomina sacra, basically an abbreviation of theos. But the King James reads, God was manifested in flesh, speaking of Jesus. But even if it was he who was manifested in flesh, it's still speaking of Jesus appearing physically on the earth. Another text is Titus 2:13, where the King James uses the concept of manifestation for both the Father and the Son, looking for the blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior Jesus Christ. Glorious appearing is epiphania, alternatively epiphany or manifestation, the noun form being phanerao in 1 Timothy 3:16. So the idea, like say, Jesus having a manifestation or a glorious appearing in the past and future is actually part of the theological vocab of the King James New Testament. And presenting from, say, King James influence on the Book of Mormon and things like that, there's no question the King James did influence Joseph at a theological level, even pre-1830.
So if I'm understanding, you're right, the point you're making is the word sort of manifest or manifested used in the King James Bible is to mean like God or
actual
Jesus
appearance,
not actually appearing and revealing himself, not just the spirit, but him physically appearing.
It's more tangible than like say a testimony or like say a stuff like that. This is actually strange when you actually look at manifest and other similar terms in the Book of Mormon. Manifest is used in the Book of Mormon in many senses, including the incarnation of Jesus as well as appearances to prophets and nations. I won't read all this just for time, but like 1 Nephi 10:17, 1 Nephi 13:42, like how Christ will manifest himself unto nations and the Jews. It's eschatological here. 1 Nephi 15:13. 2 Nephi 6:9, how Christ should manifest himself unto them in the flesh, and after he should manifest himself, they shall scourge him and crucify him, according to the words of the angel who spake it unto me. This is not like a nebulous experience. It's a physical, space-time experience, if you will. Same with 2 Nephi 25, 12, and 14, 32:6, Jacob 4:11, how Christ was manifested himself in the flesh before Jacob. That's not like a nebulous experience. It's some type of either vision or some other event that appeared in space and time. Enos 1:8, Alma 45:10. Rather, Human 8:22-23, second, 3 Nephi 10:18, which was, I don't think anyone would claim this was a nebulous experience like how Christ manifested himself into the Nephites. That was a physical space-time event.
Yes, yeah.
2 Nephi 15:23, compare 16:2. Now, here Christ is negating an appearance to the Gentiles, but he uses the term manifest here for an appearance. He just negates it, not manifest myself unto them. So Eater 4:4, behold, I have written upon these plates the very things which the brother Jared saw, and there never were greater things made manifest than those which were made manifest unto the brother Jared. And now, of course, we know Jared actually, the brother Jared had a vision of the pre-mortal Jesus, even seen him bodily. Eater 12:30-31 reads, for the brother Jared said unto the mountain Zerin, remove, and it was removed, and if he had not had faith, it would not have moved. Wherefore thou workest after men, have faith, for thus did thou manifest thyself unto thy disciples. Again, manifest in the context of brother Jared is a theophany or a Christophany here. So as I note here, in the King James New Testament, which clearly has a strong influence on Joseph's theological vocab, as well as the Book of Mormon, very explicitly, I would argue, to manifest would often have the sense of an appearance of deity, predominantly that of Jesus, and sometimes, as with Titus 2:13 in the King James, both the Father and the Son. Adding further strength to the claim that in section 20 we have an early, April 1830, allusion to a theophany, i.e. the first vision.
Right. I did not realize how much the word manifest is actually in the Book of Mormon and the King James Bible. But that's really interesting that you've shown that the word manifest is Jesus, mostly Jesus. You said the scripture in Titus is both the Father and the Son.
In the King James, yes. Some translate the Greek construction as the glorious, as a reference to only Jesus, like he's God and Savior in that passage. They argue based on Greek grammar, but the King James, which influenced Joseph, as the Father and Son, basically.
Yeah, but it's interesting that it uses the word manifest, but in a very physical, literal appearance to the people, to the Nephites, and then to Joseph Smith in Doctrine and Covenants 20. No, that's interesting. That's a really good point.
And also, before I end this particular section, this is not something that's only been noted by Latter-day Saints. There was a PhD dissertation in German that was translated and published by Common Consent Press. So maybe you're familiar with the blog By Common Consent. It was by Frederick S. Kleiner, who's not LDS. And he commented near the end of his book on the language manifest in the Book of Mormon. He noted on page 417, the word manifest occurs 51 times, and there are 5 instances of the noun manifestation. Each of these instances involve the power of the divine and either access to it or its effect upon the world. Now, it's true that it is used in an ethical sense, like a sinner manifesting to others he has been redeemed. Such cases of manifest being used in this sense is that of mortals showing other mortals of their redeemed state and change of heart and mind, as noted on pages 417 to 18 of this book. However, when a heavenly being, whether God, Jesus, angels, manifest something to a prophet, it is not in some nebulous sense. Instead, it is of a divine appearance or some other revelatory event. I'm not going to read all of it, but he actually has a very good section. For instance, revelation to a prophet. Prophets receive revelation by having things made manifest through the Spirit of God. Nephi, the first Nephite, lays out this principle to his family in 1 Nephi 22, verse 2. A revelation to a prophet is defined by its contact with the transcendent and divine. The duty of a prophet is often to know the future and to warn the people of the consequences should they not repent. This foreknowledge also involves teachings of things before they occur, such as the coming of Christ. But commenting on Jacob 7:2 in the second paragraph, Jacob says, knowledge of the coming of Christ and his salvation truly had been made manifest unto us concerning our people, what things should happen unto them. And we also had many revelations and the spirit of much prophecy, wherefore we know of Christ and his kingdom, which should come. These revelatory foreknowledge is repeated by Jacob in these discussions with Sherm, who denies that prophets can know of the coming of Christ. Jacob counters this accusation by saying that the coming of Christ hath been made manifest unto me, for I have heard and seen, and it also had made manifest unto me by the power of the Holy Ghost. Here, seeing and hearing a vision are also equated with manifestation. So Jacob actually had a vision of the then future Messiah, and he uses a language of manifestation.
Okay, so maybe the Messiah didn't appear to him physically, but he had some sort of a vision.
Yeah, at the very
as a manifestation as well.
At the very least, he saw Jesus in some type of vision. Okay. That's minimally. Now, there's personal revelation by the Spirit. There's no question like the language of manifest and manifestation can actually appear consistent with the nebulous experience, but in the flesh, the most common usage of the verb in the Book of Mormon is in connection with Christ showing himself physically. The text repeatedly mentions that Christ will manifest himself in the flesh, and there's a number of verses there. Even though these manifestations take place in different times, their shared characteristic is that of God, that God is made flesh and he's physically present. The first instance is the birth and early ministry of Jesus Christ in Palestine, which ended with his crucifixion and resurrection. Nephi describes this as the time that he should manifest himself unto the children of men. So this was like a physical, the very first physical coming of Christ, the incarnation. This wasn't like a nebulous event. He manifested himself in the world. This was like a space-time event, if you will. And then he mentions like the theophany of Christ to the Lehites, which of course in turn Nephi 10 is a tangible event for the Nephites. It's not like, say, Christ revealed himself only spiritually, like giving spiritual sensations or visions to the people. He physically, space and time, appeared to them. And of course, like the second coming, the final instance of physical manifestations of Christ is at the second coming. The Book of Mormon says that the important difference between the manifestation and the one in Palestine and to the Lehites is that this will be to the entire world. 1 Nephi 13:43. The manifestation which started with his birth was only restricted to a small geographical area. The second coming of manifestations was only among the Lehites. Nephi says that this manifesting will occur in the spirit of power and in power and great glory and in the flesh. This promise is already found in the title page, and also that the convincing the Jew and Gentiles that Jesus is Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all nations. The theological truthfulness of these prophecies is not relevant here, only that manifest also covers these grand cosmic shows of transcendent power, and most importantly, that these grand displays use the same verb as individual private experiences of contact with the divine. And that's a non-LDS scholar on the use of manifest and like terms in the Book of Mormon.
It's interesting that a non-Latter-day Saint scholar also holds this view. Like, this isn't just, faithful scholars who you might say have some bias, perhaps, to have this interpretation.
No, to be fair, let me just note, like, he's not commenting on Section 20 here. He's only commenting on language and manifest and manifestation in the Book of Mormon. So I'm not saying ipso facto he's arguing that Section 20 is a theophany. But in light of the Book of Mormon, which clearly did influence Joseph Smith's vocabulary, or at least reflects his vocabulary as a translator, the language of manifest and manifestation often, especially when it comes to Jesus, is that of theophany, not simply like a nebulous subjective experience.
Okay. Gotcha. So you would say that most likely the interpretation and understanding of that verse in D&C 20, it's not referring to a spiritual manifestation like a born-again experience, but a literal manifestation, the Lord Jesus Christ appearing to him and forgiving him of his sins. That's what
at the very least, the appearance of a member of the Godhead. Now, I would say it's actually both, because, like, of course, it would be like a spiritual experience. I don't want to, like, say it's a false dichotomy, but at the same time, it's not only some type of personal spiritual experience. It was a theophany, so.
Okay. No,
I think really the case, good. I think in light of, say, these considerations, the case that Section 20 verses 5 to 6 has a pre-1823, because it speaks about before the angel Moroni, pre-1823 evidence of a theophany is actually much stronger than even other fellow LDS have presented the case to be.
Yeah, and I, to be honest, I think most members of the church, whether faithful or critical, probably wouldn't have taken much thought of the word manifest. I know I probably would have just brushed over it and not thought of the implications that would be alluding to an actual theophany, a physical appearance of a member of the Godhead.
To be fair, this came about, my study of like the language and manifestation came about with interacting with informed Unitarians who don't believe Jesus pre-existed. 1 Timothy 3:16 is a very good text for the personal pre-existence of Jesus, and that led to my studying this for the language and manifestation elsewhere in the Book of Mormon. So I may have overlooked it if it wasn't for some Christadelphians and others.
You got them to thank.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I have two quick slides on JST Psalm 14. So do you have any other comments on Section 20 before we go on to that?
No.
Okay, well, let me make a statement. I can't go into too much detail, but Walker Wright and Don Bradley, I'm sure you've heard of Don Bradley.
Yeah.
They have a forthcoming article on Psalm 14 JST in the BYU studies, hopefully in the near future. But basically, JST Psalm 14, it comes from Old Testament Manuscript 2, pages 85 to 86, which is dated between late July 1832 and 2nd July 1833. So it's rather contemporaneous with the writing of the 1832 account of the first vision. Now, what's rather interesting is that JST Psalm 14 contains verbiage attributed to Jesus, similar to, like, say, the prophecy in the Book of Mormon, common to not just the 1832 account, but also the later 1838 first vision account. If you actually, and this is the language of JST Psalm 14, and if you're familiar with both the 1832 but the later 1838 account of the first vision, it actually contains a lot of the verbiage that Christ actually said to Joseph Smith. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no man that hath seen God, because he shows himself not unto us, therefore there is no God. Behold, they are corrupt, they have done abominable works, and none of them do it good. For the Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men, and by his voice said unto his servant, seek ye among the children of men, to see if there are any that do understand God. And he opened his mouth unto the Lord and said, behold, all these who say they are dying. The Lord answered and said, they are all gone aside, they are altogether become filthy. Thou canst behold none of those. These that are doing good, no, not one. All they have for their teachers are workers of iniquity, and there is no knowledge in them. They are they who eat out my people. They eat bread and call not upon the Lord. They are in great fear, for God dwells in the generation of the righteous. He is the counsels of the poor, because they are ashamed of the wicked, and flee unto the Lord for their refuge. They are ashamed of the counsels of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. O that Zion were established out of heaven, the salvation of Israel. O Lord, when wilt thou establish Zion? When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, Israel shall be glad. So there's actually some vocabulary and some verbiage, I should say, that is attributed to Jesus, not just in the 1832 account, but the later 1838 account, like all the people doing abominations. What's rather interesting as well is, like, one of the more significant changes to JST Psalm 14 is that the King James says the fool had said in his heart, there's no God. But the fool here says no man hath seen God. So it's kind of a refutation of, like, no man can see God. Maybe that's something we can discuss in the near future as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, I didn't notice that. Yeah, there is no man that hath seen God.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore there is no. Okay. And yeah, you said there's some similar verbiage, like.
Yeah, it's similar to, like, what I was saying about 2 Nephi 27, 24 to 26, where, like, some of the verbiage that appears there appears in the 1838 account, not the 1832 account. And some of the verbiage here from the Lord, decrying the people, it does seem to have, like, strong parallels to some of the verbiage in the 1838 account, not merely the contemporary 1832 account of the first vision.
Okay.
And as I said, like, Walker Wright and Don Bradley have a forthcoming article, which I'm sure will go into more detail than this, but that's to whet everyone's appetite.
Okay. And maybe you're going to get to this because you've talked about the parallels between, so this is Psalm 14 in the Joseph Smith translation. So this would have been what, 1831, 1832?
Well, that transcription comes from Old Testament manuscript 285 to 86, July 1832 to 2nd July 1833. So we're in contemporary with the 1832 account of the first vision.
Okay. And what's sort of like your overall point just with the parallels between this and the 1832 and 1838 account? Just
it shows that the language and some of the themes in the 1838 account are not influenced merely by contemporary events. They're in the background already years before these events purportedly influence in toto some of the concepts in the 1838 account of the first vision.
Okay, gotcha. No, I think a critic, if I'm trying to think what a critic might say, oh, well, he's thinking about those things, they're going on around in his mind, and then he's putting them in the Joseph Smith translation, and then he's taking those things and then, like, adding them into his first vision accounts as he's retelling it over time. What sort of, would you have a quick response to that if a critic would sort of interpret it that way, perhaps?
If one holds, even if one holds a supernaturalist, like, worldview, like, they can still be a naturalist when it comes to Mormonism. That's possible, but it does kind of show, at the very least, some of the themes and the ideas informing the 1838 account that we find in the account are not novelties, or simply the result of interacting with then contemporary events.
Right. So you're basically saying that this shows that Joseph Smith didn't just, for example, his 1838 account, he didn't just come up with it then because of
or he's like, or he's responding, like, say, challenges to his leadership merely and things like that. It's like, no, this would have been part and parcel, if you will, of the written record, whether directly or indirectly, about the first vision before he would put pen to paper for the 1838 account and other things like that. Because, like, some critics, not all, but, like, some would say, well, a lot of the ideas or the purported novelties, if you will, of, say, the different accounts are Joseph responding to then contemporary events. So, like, the language of Jesus is like changed to suit his agenda. It kind of shows, well, this is not necessarily the case. Like, there's a lot, it's a bit more nuanced and a bit more complex than this. And the case for Joseph's truthfulness, if you will, is better than how it's generally presented.
Okay. No, that's a good point.
I'll just put myself back on. So, any comments or questions about that, or hopefully that made some sense?
No, that actually did. Those were really good insights, especially what you shared about DNC 20. I thought that was really interesting because that's something I'd never picked up on before, and also with Psalms 14. Never actually, I think, even read that passage in the JST. So that was really good insights that you're showing there.
So do you want to move on to the next section, like
Let's do
LDS
it.
leaders? Yeah, let me just see if I can share my screen. Can you see the PDF?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. Do you want to like start like maybe what's the TLDR version of this, and maybe we can work through this?
So this quote.
Oh no, this is a preface to my comments for the rest of it, so it's okay. You can ignore this for the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so there's quotes from certain leaders of the church that critics would point to. For example, people like Brigham Young, Orson Hyde, I think Heber C. Kimball as well. Who else? John Taylor, and also like Oliver Cowdery.
Yeah.
And there's quotes of them, referring to the angel visiting Joseph Smith. I think most of them say 1823. Maybe some quotes don't actually give a date, but that it was the angel that appeared and told him which church to join, and forgave him of his sins. And I think there's even one or two quotes that make it seem that, the Lord didn't come to and appear to him and deliver the message, but it was the angel. I think there's one quote, it might be Heber C. Kimball, who says, the Lord didn't come with the armies of heaven.
Brigham Young.
Oh, Brigham Young. Okay. I'm getting muddled up there.
It's okay.
But yeah, so then critics would interpret that as, when he was telling people about his first vision, he wasn't telling them about, the Father and the Son. He was just telling them the angel. So kind of like what I said at the beginning, he's changing or evolving his story, and the visitation of the Father and the Son was not something being emphasized or really told by Joseph Smith, by the church leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview. So, do you want me to begin? And we can actually stop and start every so often. But
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, the following comes from like Athanasius, one of the most important early Christians after post the First Council of Nicaea, and his quote is rather apropos. He's interacting with Arians like his theological opponents, and they're quoting the works of a fellow by the name of Dionysius. And he says in his work, yes, he, Dionysius, wrote it, and we too admit that his letter runs thus. But just as he wrote this, he also wrote many other letters, and they ought to consult those also, in order that the fate of men may be made clear from them all, and not from this alone. And basically this is the whole, yes, Brigham may have said this, but he also said a bunch of other things as well, and the same when it comes to like other people. So you have to take, for each person, and I know you agree with me on this, you have to take their entire writings or sermons on a particular topic. You have to take the entire ball of wax. So I think this
don't just cherry pick one or two quotes that support that position, but then ignore others that may go against it. It's kind of the same with the episode we did on modalism in the Book of Mormon and other scriptural writings.
Yeah, it's like Mosiah 15:1-5 on the face value is a difficult text to interpret. But if you read the Isaiah passage that's quoted in toto beforehand, and everything else that's said afterwards, of all the active possible interpretations, you can't hold to the modalist interpretation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to this. Like, yes, Brigham may have said, or Orson Hyde may have said this on one occasion, but he also said things before and afterwards. And you have to take the entire ball of wax for each author. Now, before we kind of discuss like individual authors, like there's a few things, one should always preface this interaction with. First, the first vision was already being published. A lot of these quotes come to say 1850s, 1860s.
That's right.
But the first vision was already published. Like you have the Wentworth letter. It's not like, say, it was only in Joseph's 1832 journal. This was being published like in the Times and Seasons and the Millennial Star, in the UK, US, and even, as we'll see, Denmark as well. And it was not an esoteric teaching in the US or the UK. Like some early critics like John Hyde, who I'll quote momentarily, And Stenhouse would argue that some of the more difficult or esoteric teachings like plural marriage and Adam God were actively withheld from members or potential converts in the UK. Now, even presenting from that debate, this is not the case for the first vision. It was actually published and known even by then future critics of the church from England. And also Orson Pratt actually published the first vision in Scotland in 1840, and we'll quote Pratt momentarily. Yeah. Also, the first vision, the first edition of the Pearl of Great Price was published in England in 1851, and this was actually a text because many of the Quorum of the 12 would serve missions and stuff like that. They knew about this, where it speaks of, like, say, Joseph in 1820. Seeing the Father and the Son, the Father points to Jesus, says, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." It's the traditional narrative of the first vision. I won't read it all, but it appears on pages 38 to 39 of the 1851 Pearl of Great Price. So,
sorry, is this from Orson Pratt's secondhand account?
Oh no, this is from the what's now published in the Pearl of Great Price today.
Oh, okay.
We'll quote Pratt momentarily, but this is basically our first vision was published in 1851 in the very popular tract, later canonical work, the Pearl of Great Price in England. So this is not like even then this is not an esoteric teaching, at this time point in time. So, and even like and the first vision was actually being published in the Deseret News throughout, like the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. I came across this morning. It's like Alma L. Smith in a letter to the editor, November 11th, 1875, in the Deseret News, where he's recounting a conference in La'i Oahu in the Sandwich Islands, and I know I butchered the pronunciation of those places, where he says, during the afternoon and part of the evening, he, Edwin Woolley, read considerable in several other books, read the account of the Pearl of Great Price, of the first vision of the prophet Joseph Smith. He's finding the plates, the organization of the church, etc. So even in the Sandwich Islands, you actually have Edwin Woolley and other Latter-day Saints teaching the first vision from the Pearl of Great Price. This is not the first vision of Moroni. This is the appearance of Jesus and God the Father in the Sandwich Islands in 1875, contemporary with Brigham Young.
Right.
You also have the Life of Joseph Smith, Deseret News, May 29th, 1852, where I gave, i.e. Erastus Holmes, and this is Joseph Smith, a brief relation of my experience while in my juvenile years, say from 6 years up to the time I received the first visitation of angels, which was when I was about 14 years of old. So he would have been 14, 1819, 1820. So this is the first vision. Now, he does use first visitation of angels. Maybe in the future show we can discuss like angels being used for deity, but be it as may, first vision of heavenly beings at the very least in 1852. It's not simply a single angel, it's plural angels here. And again, note the year 1852 in the Deseret News. This is not some kind of esoteric publication. This is the main newspaper of the people in the area.
And on a side note, doesn't Joseph Smith mention, is it in his 1835 account, that there was also many angels?
Yeah, he mentions like two heavenly personages, and then also mentions like, and there were also many angels as well. So. Also the Deseret News, and some of these I just picked up this morning. I just thought I'd include them because they haven't really been well discussed. So, Deseret News, July 2nd, 1877, announcement of the first vision and other Joseph Smith related accounts in Danish. Joseph Smith the Prophet, the first number of this work in the Danish language will be issued tomorrow. The compilers and editors are brothers A. Jensen, i.e. Andrew Jensen, he was a church historian, and J. E. Brune. Purpose publishing in monthly parts, and then they give the parts: parentage of Joseph Smith, the Prophet, early education, youth, religious impression, first vision, and distinct to that, visit of the angel Moroni.
Okay.
In the 1857 book,
so it doesn't complete the first vision with the visitation from Moroni.
And this is 1877. So
right.
In the 1857 book, which was written by a British convert to the church who would leave, John Hyde's book, Mormonism, Its Leaders and Designs, 1857, page 199. He gives a chronology of the history of the church. And under April of 1820, Smith pretends to receive his first vision while praying in the woods. He asserts that God the Father and Jesus Christ came to him from the heavens, and like Muhammad's Gabriel, told him that his sins were forgiven, that he was the chosen of God to reinstate his kingdom and reintroduce the gospel, that none of the denominations were right, etc. This is from like an anti-Mormon book in 1857.
Yeah. What date was it?
Oh yeah, John Hyde's book, Mormonism, Its Leaders and Designs, 1857, page 199.
Right.
And this is on archive.org. I have a print copy, but it's also on archive.org. What's rather interesting, and this is an aside, is if you read the early material on the first vision from the Tanners, they used to claim no critic of the church knew about the appearance of the Father and His Son until like the 1860s or 1870s. When Hyde's book here was actually pointed out to them, they had to do a revision of some of their arguments. So this is a pretty important book for many reasons.
Because really, that's not many years after Joseph Smith's death.
No, just 13 years.
Yeah.
And this also shows it was not an esoteric teaching because Hyde was a convert from Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of shows like it was a disseminated teaching. It wasn't like, say, an esoteric teaching, because if the critical approach is correct, like not even the upper echelons of the church, like Taylor and Brigham, and we'll review some of them now, knew about the first vision. Father and Son appearing in 1820 before Moroni. How he's like some normie like John Hyde actually gained this information.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just have a question.
Go ahead.
So were the missionaries, would you say by the 1850s or even the 40s, would they have been talking about Joseph Smith's first vision when they were converting people then?
My view is like in the early days of the church, the first vision was Moroni's visit to Joseph Smith.
Yes.
Joseph only later in his life realized the global importance of the first vision.
Yeah.
So people would have known about the first vision, but like Joseph would have just maybe viewed it for the most part as like a private affair. But he didn't. Only later in his life would he realize like its global import. So that's why there seems to be a conflation. We'll discuss it near the end amongst Lucy and William of a conflation of the first vision and of the Father and Son and first vision of Moroni, and that has led to some issues. But I do believe like for them they would have been teaching the gospel, and it would have grown from more like incidental missioning to like a more central thing. Like when you served your mission, I'm sure that would have been like one of the very first things.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be like as central as it was then, but it was clearly talked about, discussed, and written about. So how they would have presented it, I don't know off the top of my head, but they clearly did know about it.
Yeah, because by 1842, that's when it was published. So most of the prominent leaders, most of the missionaries, you would think would have been aware of it.
It doesn't make sense that they wouldn't have known about it.
Yeah,
because it was published in basically for the church globally, because like US and the UK, that would be where the substantial sum of members were, and like the 12 did serve missions in England and so forth. So I just don't buy the theory, and we'll see why, that Taylor and all were ignorant about the first vision or fudged things pretty badly. I mean, I'm open to the fact they may have been inconsistent or slipped up here and there, but at the same time, not to the degree where if you were to read the Tanners or some other people, like the substantial, not accidental slip-ups, if you will.
And perhaps this is just me speculating, perhaps because Joseph Smith didn't emphasize it much during his life until the end of his life. So maybe when they converted into the church, the first vision wasn't a big part of their sort of view of Joseph Smith as a prophet or their conversion. So maybe that's why they sort of downplayed it, or maybe at times didn't mention it, but then you're probably going to show other times where they did mention it.
Yeah. The first person we'll look at, if that's okay, is John Taylor, the third president of the church. Now, he actually explicitly mentions the first vision or aspects of the first vision on a couple of occasions. For instance, this is from letter from Elder John Taylor to the editor and interpreter Anglais et Français, Latter-day Saint Millennial Star, from August 1st, 1850, and the letter itself was dated June 25th, 1850. So we have something published in August of 1850, dating the original dating to June of 1850. So this is pretty early, and it mentions like the background to Joseph Smith. He speaks about the religious revival. I won't read all of this, but when the revival was over, there was a contention as to which of these various societies the person who was converted should belong. One of his father's family joined one society and another a different one. His mind was troubled. He saw contention instead of peace, and division instead of union, and when he reflected upon the multifarious creeds and professions there were in existence, he thought impossible for all to be right, and if God taught one, he did not teach the others, for God is not the author of confusion. In reading his Bible, he was remarkably struck with the passage in James, 1st chapter, 5th verse, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that gives to all men liberally and upbraids not, and it shall be given him." Believing in the word of God, he retired into a grove and called upon the Lord to give him wisdom in relation to this matter. While he was thus engaged, he was surrounded by a brilliant light, and two glorious personages presented themselves before, who exactly resembled each other in features, and who gave him information upon the subject which had been previously agitated in his mind. He was given to understand that the churches were all of them in error with regard to many things, and he was commanded not to go after them, and he received a promise that the fullness of the gospel should at some future time be unfolded unto him, after which the vision withdrew, leaving his mind in a state of calmness and peace. So here, James 1:5, being read in the context of religious contention, wanting to know which church is true, two personages who resembled each other appeared to him and told him not to join any church, they were all wrong, and so forth. So if one wants to be hypercritical, it says, well, it doesn't explicitly say it's God the Father and Jesus, but who else could it be?
Yeah, no, and it's very similar. It's almost like identical. Is it the 1842 account in the John Wentworth letter? That one,
Yeah.
His accounting there, it just seems dead consistent with both the 1838 and 1842 account. And if Elder John Taylor wrote this in 1850, then he definitely was aware of the visitation of the Father and the Son.
Yeah. There's other places as well. For instance, burial services in ancient practice for December 31st, 1876, which was published in volume 18 of the Journal Discourses.
This time he even says, I see there the Father and the Son. So he...
Yeah, I'll just read it for those listening. And again, there are other things associated with these matters, all bearing or more or less upon the same points. When God selected Joseph Smith to open up the last dispensation, which is called the dispensation of the fullness of times, the Father and the Son appeared to him, arrayed in glory, and the Father addressing himself to Joseph. At the same time, pointing to the Son, said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." And then he goes on to discuss Moroni and so forth. So you clearly have pre-Moroni, explicitly the Father and Son appearing to Joseph Smith in a vision.
Yeah.
Again, December 31st, 1876, and this was published in 1877 in England, I will note. So you have like the sermon here in the Americas, and then like in the old world in Britain, you actually have it published by the printers. So again, global reach as well. So
okay, so I think John Taylor definitely knew about Joseph Smith's first vision, that he was visited by the Father and the Son.
And there's one other one that's brief. The interest of humanity should be observed, March 2nd, 1879. When the Father and the Son and Moroni and others came to Joseph Smith, he had a priesthood conferred upon him, which he conferred upon others for the purposes of manifesting the laws of life, the gospel of the Son of God, by direct authority, that light and truth might be spread forth among all nations. So although he does not say like Father and Son appeared in 1820, and then Moroni 3 years later, you actually have the Father and Son appearing to Joseph Smith at some time as well. So clearly he did know that the Father and Son, just even based on this, appeared to Joseph Smith in a vision. And of course, like with the other evidence, he clearly didn't know about the first vision. It was a distinct event from Moroni, which was later, and so on and so forth. So I think he's a very good witness that the traditional narrative of the first vision was known, at least by him and others in his company.
Yeah.
Want me to just go on to Brigham Young?
Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome. Yeah. So Brigham Young, he's the one that had the quote that...
Yeah, I'll address that as well. So,
yeah, the Lord didn't come with the armies of heaven, but he sent his angel to the boy Joseph Smith or whatever. You probably may even have the quote.
It's the very first one.
Okay. Do you want me to read it?
Oh yeah, sure. This is from the Constitution and Government of the United States, Rights and Policies of Latter-day Saints, and this is from February of 1855. So actually 5 years after John Taylor's letter and stuff like that. So and 4 years after the publication of the first edition of the Pearl of Great Price. But yeah, if you want to read the passage.
Yeah. Okay, so the Lord did not come with the armies of heaven in power and great glory, nor send his messengers. Is that panoplied with aught?
Yeah, panoplied. Yeah, he was pretty wordy when he wanted to be. Yeah.
With aught else than the truth of heaven, to communicate to the meek, the lowly, the youth of humble origin, the sincere inquire after the knowledge of God. But he did send his angel to this same obscure person, Joseph Smith Jr., who afterwards became a prophet, seer, and revelator, and informed him that he should not join any of the religious sects of the day, for they were all wrong, that they were following the precepts of men instead of Lord Jesus, that he had a work for him to perform, inasmuch as he should prove faithful before him.
Okay, so the critical response from, like, say, the Tanners and others who used this argument is like, Brigham is explicitly saying the father or the Lord at least never appeared to Joseph. He only worked through intermediaries, here an angel. That's how the Tanners in Shadow Reality and other works kind of present the quote as.
Yeah, and I think they would also say that, he sent his angel, and the angel informed him that he should not join, any of the, religious sects of the day. So they almost say like he's either conflating, or he's under the impression that it was the angel that delivered the message not to join any of the churches. Yeah.
Now this is why I decided to start with the Athanasius quote. It's like what Athanasius said in the 4th century is true today. You have to take, if you're going to be studying Brigham on any particular topic, you have to take Brigham as a whole. Now, the standard LDS response, and I think there's plausibility to this, and this is from Fair. Don't shoot me for this. Cooper Johnson, D. Charles Pyle, and D. Charles Pyle is like a very smart cookie. Brigham does not say the Lord. Brigham doesn't say that the Lord didn't come ever. He says that he didn't come with the armies of heaven in power and glory. In other words, he didn't come with a bunch of pomp and circumstance. And as a matter of fact, when you look closer at the entire quote, Brigham specifically says that the Lord did come. It was the angel who informed him. It was the Lord who informed him, not the angel. Read the sentence. But he did send his angel, and he, the Lord, informed him, Joseph. So the quote from Brigham takes on a whole new meaning when you look at the whole thing. Now, I think this is plausible, and I think this is the correct interpretation, but it's still ambiguous. Because
yeah,
I
was going to push back and say, like, yeah, it could be, yeah, you're right, because it says, and he informed him.
Yeah,
so
and that's the thing, like, it could refer to the Lord, but it could also refer to the angel. I mean,
yeah.
Unfortunately, Brigham not say, like, and he, by the way, I mean the Lord, so you naysayers. The problem, though, is, like, Brigham did explicitly teach the first vision elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because that's probably what gives that interpretation maybe some plausibility.
For instance, this is from Establishment of the Kingdom of God, Gathering of the Poor, etc., March 3rd, 1861. So 6 years after this, but it's still like even before and after the initial quote, like people are still talking about the first vision. We saw it from John Taylor. So the Lord chose Joseph Smith, called upon him at 14 years of age, gave him visions, and led him along, guided and directed him in his obscurity until he brought forth the plates and translated them, and Marion Harris was prevailed upon to sustain the printing of the Book of Mormon. All this was done in the depths of poverty, obscurity, and weakness. So the Lord chose Joseph, called him at 14 years of age, and gave him visions. So I think this is a very good evidence that Brigham did clearly know about the first vision in 1820. And so did these contemporaries, like John Taylor, who was his successor. He, as we've seen here, clearly didn't know about the first vision. And as we see here, even his theological sparring partner, if you will, Orson Pratt, later on, didn't explicitly teach about the first vision. So whatever ambiguity about this quote is, and I'll grant you, like, although I think this response is plausible, it still rests upon an ambiguity. So I don't think, like, the critics or the apologists can explicitly win the day, if you will, on this. I think, like, in light of this quote and others of contemporaries and other publications, Brigham did clearly know about the first vision in 1820, and the Lord was more direct, if you will, than this.
No, I think a critic may even that last quote, they could possibly say, oh, it's maybe a little bit vague or slightly ambiguous. It says that the Lord called upon him, when he was 14, gave him visions, but doesn't clearly say that it was the Lord that visited him, but it's kind of implied, but they might say it's...
Yeah, and they would also have to explain, like, why whenever Brigham went against the mainstream, and he did that a lot, people called him up on it, and he debated people about it, like Adam God. That's a pretty obvious example. But here, like, you have to explain, like, why there's no furore about this. Brigham is not contradicting people, as he would often publicly contradict people. Again, Orson Pratt, Adam God comes to mind. And also, how do you explain the contemporary evidence from people he knew who were teaching a personal appearance of the Father and the Son in 1820, not like through an intermediary, i.e. an angel?
And some of these would have been like public, talks they were given. So, like,
at conferences.
At conferences, he would have been hearing this as well. So it's not like he's not referring to the Father and the Son, or he is, but he's just being a bit ambiguous with it. But there's no way he...
And also, you have to keep in mind, like if you're addressing fellow Latter-day Saints, there can be a lot of insider baseball. I mean, like, if you're giving a talk in the first vision, for instance, to a fellow LDS congregation, you're not going to go, like, into painful deal because you're going to assume they already know this, so there's going to be, like, a lot of preaching to the choir here, literally, as well. So
yeah, there's
no need to reinvent the wheel, as if, like how you would discuss the first vision in a gospel doctrine saying to fellow LDS will be different. Not substantially so, but, like, in many respects, there will be differences. Would say how you would have taught, like, someone who knew nothing about Joseph Smith on your mission, Yeah,
that's true, because if I were to refer to, like, I might just say, Joseph Smith had his first vision in 1820, but I may not always go into the detail that, he saw God the Father and Jesus Christ, because you would assume if you mentioned it, say, in a Sunday school, people would know what that means. You wouldn't have to go into detail.
Yeah, but it also gets worse for the critics. This is from How Divisions Were Introduced in the Christian World, the Gospel Perfect, but its Teachers Imperfect, the Priesthood and its Restoration, June 23rd, 1867. When Joseph was a boy, Joseph's mother, one of his brothers, and one, if not two, of his sisters were members of the Presbyterian Church, and on this account the Presbyterians hunted the family with great tenacity, and in the midst of these revivals among the religious bodies, the invitation, "Come and join our church," was often extended to Joseph, but more particularly from the Presbyterians. Joseph was naturally inclined to be religious, and being young and surrounded with this excitement, no wonder that he became seriously impressed with the necessity of serving the Lord. But as the cry on every hand was, "Lo, here is Christ, and lo, there," said he, "Lord, teach me that I might know for myself who among these are right." And what was the answer? "They are all out of the way, they have all gone astray, and there is none that doeth good, no, not one." When he found out that none were right, he began to inquire of the Lord what was right, and he learned for himself. Was he aware of what was going to be done? By no means. He did not know what the Lord was going to do with him, although he had informed him that the Christian churches were all wrong, because they had not the holy priesthood, and he had strayed from the holy commandments of the Lord, precisely as the children of Israel did. So here Brigham is actually saying that the Lord told Joseph directly all the churches were wrong, they were corrupt, and so on and so forth. So and there's no mention of like using an intermediary figure here, like an angel or some other figure as a representative. It's actually the Lord directly. So it seems like he's cognizant of the traditional first vision account here, because he mentions like the Presbyterian influence on his parents and his mom and these siblings and the religious commotion and so on and so forth, and then he says it's the Lord who told him not to join any of the churches and so on and so forth. So
yeah, it's very consistent with the 1838 account.
Yeah, and he also mentions he was only about 14 years of age. So this would put it in like 1820 as well.
Okay.
Again, Brigham Young, personal revelation, the basis of personal knowledge, philosophical view of creation, apostasy, involves disorganization and return to primitive element, one-man power, September 17th, 1876, and yes, they did use Puritan-like titles for these works. If you're familiar with the Puritans, like a subtitle would be like an entire chapter of a book. Better Canon speaks of Christians. We are Christians professedly, according to your religion. People have gathered to themselves certain ideas and laid them down as systems, calling them religion, all professing to believe and obey the scriptures. Their religions are peculiar to themselves. Our religion is peculiar to God, to angels, and to the righteous of time and eternity. Why are we persecuted because of our religion? Why was Joseph Smith persecuted? Why was he hunted from neighborhood to neighborhood, from city to city, from state to state, and at last suffered death? Because that should be he. He received revelations from the Father, from the Son, and was ministered to by holy angels, and published to the world the direct will of the Lord concerning his children on the earth. So here, Brigham actually says one of the reasons why Joseph was persecuted is he received revelations from the Father, from the Son, and it was ministered to by angels. So again, it's not like explicitly saying the Father and Son appeared to him in 1820, but at the same time, he received direct revelations from the Father and his Son.
Yeah, sort of implies.
Yeah. Again, this is the type of insider baseball speak you would say to other Latter-day Saints without saying reinventing the theological wheel or the doctrinal wheel, if you will. Again, this is all consistent with being cognizant of the first vision accounts.
Yeah. So Brigham Young, in these statements, it seems like he is implicitly, sort of like referring to it, to the visitation of the Father and the Son. And even if you could argue that it's a bit ambiguous, certainly he was aware. You couldn't really argue he wasn't aware of it.
So this kind of goes back to like why I quote Athanasius at the start. Yeah, you have that kind of one kind of maybe ambiguous statement in one of his sermons, but then you have all the other sermons you have to deal with, and I just think it's intellectually more fair to argue Brigham may have been a bit ambiguous in one place, but he was rather explicit elsewhere. So, the weight of the evidence would show the purportedly ambiguous one. The he probably refers to God, not the angel, as some other LDS have, and that's like some kind of post hoc rationalization. It's like if you take someone by the whole ball of wax, it's only intellectually fair to conclude Brigham didn't know about the first vision.
Yeah, no, you should be intellectually fair and look at all the quotes and not just cherry pick the ones that support your position. I don't know if I'd read those quotes before, the ones you just showed me. I don't know, because I've been on Fair Latter-day Saints, but I don't think they even have those quotes up unless I haven't found them.
No, Mormonr, aka the B.H. Roberts Foundation, is the best place on the internet.
Yes, I've been recommended to go there. I'm gonna have to search through that site. Looks really
but some of these are actually on the Mormonr website.
Okay.
But it's okay. Okay, so Orson Pratt. Orson was a very interesting fellow. I'm not going to read all of this, but this comes from an interesting account of several remarkable visions and of the late discovery of ancient American records, which was published in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1840, the account I mentioned at the earlier.
Is this considered a second-hand account of the first vision? This one?
It would be secondhand because it comes from Orson, but it would be he would have got it from Joseph Smith. So
yes, okay.
And this is 1840. So at first, Joseph, was severely tempted by the powers of darkness, which endeavored to overcome him. But he continued to seek for deliverance until darkness gave way from his mind, and he was enabled to pray in fervency of the spirit and in faith. And while thus pouring out his soul, anxiously desiring an answer from God, he at length saw a very bright and glorious light in the heavens above, which at first seemed to be at a considerable distance. He continued praying, while the light appeared to be gradually descending towards him, and as it drew nearer, it increased in brightness and magnitude, so that by the time that it reached the tops of the trees, the whole wilderness for some distance around was illuminated in a most glorious and brilliant manner. He expected to have seen the leaves and boughs of the trees consumed, and as the light came in contact with him, but perceiving that it did not produce the effect, he was discouraged with the hopes of being able to endure its presence. It continued descending slowly until it rested upon the earth, and he was enveloped in the midst of it. When it came upon him, it produced a peculiar sensation throughout his whole system, and immediately his mind was caught away from the natural objects with which he was surrounded, and he was enwrapped in a heavenly vision, and saw two glorious personages, who exactly resembled each other in their features or likeness. He was informed that his sins were forgiven. He was also informed upon the subjects which had for some time previously agitated his mind, namely, that all the religious denominations were believing in incorrect doctrines, and consequently that none of them was acknowledged of God and his church and kingdom, and was expressly commanded to not go after them, and he received a promise that the true doctrine, the fullness of the gospel, should at some future time be made known to him, after which the vision withdrew, leaving his mind in a state of calmness and peace indescribable. So, one should read the entirety of the passage. I'm just going to quote. I just quote like some of the more relevant section, but Orson clearly knew about the first vision.
Definitely.
And there's other things as well. Like if you're familiar with the Simpsons, the whole "stop it, he's already dead." This is where the gift will be rather apropos. But like there's a discourse by Elder Orson Pratt delivered at the Tabernacle, Salt Lake City, February 24th, 1869, which was recorded in the Deseret News 3 days later. When did the Lord manifest himself to this man, Joseph Smith? Read our history if you wish to understand all the particulars. On this occasion, I shall barely refer you to the early history of the church imprint. The Lord revealed himself to that person, not in his manhood, but in his youth. We have heard much said by those who know nothing of this matter about old Joe Smith. How old was Joseph when the Lord manifested himself to him? He was about 14 years and 4 months old. So this would put it around like April of 1820. Rather interestingly, the same month and year John Hyde, a critic, actually put it. Was that a very Asian man? Look around here in this assembly and hunt up children 14 years of age, and you will immediately admit that they do not look very Asian. And then he mentions like the religious turmoil like amongst the Presbyterians and the Baptists, and how as a result, after reading James 1:5, Joseph went out into a little grove near his father's house in the town of Manchester, Ontario County, state of New York, and there he knelt down in all the simplicity of a child and prayer to the Father in the name of Jesus, that he would show him which among all the churches was the true one. Said he, "Show me, Father, who are in possession of truth. Let me know, O Lord, the right way, and I will walk therein." He had now come to a person who was able to teach him. All his inquiries previously had been futile and vain, but now he applied to the right source. Did the Lord hear him? Yes, but he had to exercise faith. This young man, while he was thus praying, was not discouraged because he was tempted, but he continued praying until he overcame the powers of darkness, so like the appearance of Satan here. And then it mentions how the heavens, as it were opened up to him, or in other words, a glorious pillar of light, like the brightness of the sun, appeared in the heavens above him, and approached the spot where he was praying, his eyes fixed upon it, and his heart were lifted up before the Most High. And then it speaks of, I just kind of skip some of it. He mentions, like, again, the encircling of the light and how it would be consumed.
Yeah.
And then two glorious personages whose countenance shone above with an exceeding great luster. One then spoke to him, saying, while pointing to the other, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Here again, so Father, Jesus, 14 years of age, religious turmoil, James 1:5, all the themes in the traditional first vision narrative. Mr. Smith, this young man, in the simplicity of his heart, continued saying to these personages, "Which church should I join? Which is the true church?" And then he was told, like, not to join any of them. Like, again, the traditional narrative. I won't read all of it, but again, Orson did know about this. And there's a number of other things as well, like December 19th, 1869, by and by an obscure individual, a young man, rose up and in the midst of all Christendom proclaimed the startling news that God had sent an angel to him, that through his faith, prayers, and sincere repentance he had beheld a supernatural vision, that he had seen a pillar of light descend from heaven and saw two glorious personages, clothed upon with this pillar of fire, whose countenance shone like the sun at noonday. Again, this is my beloved Son, hear ye him. So again, it's clearly the Father and Son, not simply two heavenly beings whose identity is in question here. This is 1869. There's a bunch of others as well. I'm not sure if you want me to read them, but like there's accounts as well in the Desert News, September 28, 1872. Tabernacular Services, which is a summary of a speech Orson delivered September 19th, 1880, where the speaker, Pratt, gave illustrations to prove this and to substantiate his assertion that for centuries the world had been without the light of the gospel, without divine authority, and without Christian church. The beginning of the new revelation was coincident with the sign up of this Church of Latter-day Saints. The speaker then described the first vision of the prophet Joseph, something far different than that the world had been accustomed for centuries. And again, you have Orson Pratt, the divine authority of the priesthood. I don't have the year for this, but it was published in 1882. And there was a report of the same in the Desert News of October 11th, 1880. You find a little by Joseph Smith calling upon the name of the Lord in the spring of the year 1820, before he was not yet 15 years of age, and as a result of calling upon the name of the Lord was that pillar of fire appeared in the heavens above him, and it continued to descend and grow brighter and brighter until it reached the top of the trees. And then it mentions, a heavenly vision, two glorious personages, one was the Father, the other was the Son. And how this was understood by the Desert News when they were like given the summary of the conference talk, Orson Pratt, then referred to the first vision of Joseph Smith, when but by he saw two personages, the Father and the Son, yet the sight did not consume him, although it was written that without the priesthood no man can see the face of God and live. The reason why he was enabled to look upon the face of God and live was because he was chosen and ordained in the spirit world to the holy priesthood and was selected to come forth in this age to usher in the dispensation of the fullness of times. So
it's interesting because I've wondered about that scripture that it's it says it what did you say, DNC 84?
Section 84, like no man can see the Father. No, I think it's not speaking about the priesthood per se. I think it's about the power of godliness. Pratt did believe, because Joseph was foreordained to the priesthood, that was not an issue to see God.
Right. Yeah, because there's other passages that, like Moses, when he sees God, like the Spirit of God has to come.
Yeah, he has to be transfigured. And also section 67 as well, verse 11, speaks about that. But here, I think it's fair to say Orson definitely knew about the first vision. He
can't.
Anyone who claims Orson was not familiar with the first vision, you might get like a statement where he sees Joseph saw two heavenly beings or some kind of generic language like that. But it would be disingenuous to claim, well, he's ambiguous here. So like, he's clearly explicit time and time again throughout his theological career when the saints are in Utah about this. It's not something that developed for him anyway.
No, I agree. No, you could probably argue a little bit with Brigham Young. Some of his quotes were a bit ambiguous, but with Orson Pratt, not at all. And one thing that actually stood out to me, I think, was the 1841. He referred to both being forgiven of his sins and being told, not to join any of the churches, which is interesting.
Because there are teams of the 1832 and later 1832.
Yeah, because, and we'll probably talk about this later, but critics would say his purpose for praying and what he's told changes from the 1832 to 1838 account. Now, the 1835 talks a bit about both as well, but I thought it was interesting in his account that he also refers to his sins being forgiven and being told which church.
And also, just from a logical perspective, they're not actually inconsistent with one another. You can pray for two different things, but they're not like mutually contradictory. You can pray for a remission of sins and also know which church is true. I fail to see why that's in of itself an evidence of inconsistency. An inconsistency or a contradiction would be X and not X at the same time, but they're not mutually exclusive at any time. So.
Yeah, because it seems like he's praying he wants to follow the right path. He wants to find salvation. He wants to join the right church, and that therefore also to receive remission of his sins, be on the right path back to God.
And as Dad and Vogel, although I think he stretches things, like a lot of the Smith family were religious seekers, and like for them, I know like many of them did not believe there was a true church, and like many of them were universalists in some respects, but like for like modern day religious speakers, if you believe that there's a true church, you don't have like this completely Protestant or deistic view of the church. There has to be a true church, or at least a true gospel, but doesn't mean like you're only going to pray to be guided to that. You also want to receive like a remission of sins. They're not mutually exclusive. So maybe like in a future show we can actually discuss like purported inconsistencies between the different accounts.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah. Now this is Orson Hyde. I'll address the Journal Discourses quote that you have in your video as the second part of the section. But again, he was cognizant with the fact that in Joseph's 15th year, and his 15th year would be in 1820, like 1805 his first year, 1806 his second year, 1820 would be in his 15th year. He would be in 14 years of age. So it mentions like something that happened when he reached his 15th year, he began to take seriously the importance of preparing for future existence and so on and so forth. Now this comes from, I've never studied German, so I'm not going to even try to pronounce this, but the English translation is "a cry from the wilderness, a voice from the dust of the earth." This is from the English translation that's found on the Joseph Smith Papers website. The German, which I'm sure is online as well, pages 14 to 16. But what happened in his 15th year? Well, he mentions like religious turmoil, James 1:5, the standard background, if you will, to the first vision. And then Orson writes, and this is Orson Hyde, he considered the scripture an authorization for him to solemnly call upon his creator to present his needs before him with a certain expectation of some success, and so began to pour out to the Lord with fervent determination the earnest desires of his soul. On one occasion he went to a small grove of trees near his father's home and knelt down before God in solemn prayer. The adversary then made several strenuous efforts to cool his ardent soul. He filled his mind with doubts and brought to mind all manner of inappropriate images to prevent him from obtaining the object of his endeavors. But the overflowing mercy of God came to buy him up and gave new impetus to his failing strength. However, the dark clouds soon parted, and light and peace filled his frightened heart. Once again he called upon the Lord with faith and fervency of spirit. At this sacred moment, the natural world around him was excluded from his view, so that he would be open to the presentation of heavenly and spiritual things. Two glorious heavenly personages stood before him, resembling each other exactly in features and stature. They told him that his prayers had been answered, that the Lord had decided to grant him a special blessing. He was also told to not join any of the religious sects or denominations, because all of them erred in doctrine and none were recognized by God as his church and kingdom. He was further commanded to wait patiently until some future time, when the true doctrine of Christ and the complete truth of the gospel would be revealed to him. The vision closed, and peace and calm filled his mind. Maybe it's just me, but I think it's rather obvious that Orson Hyde, when he wrote this German tract in 1842, again contemporary with Joseph Smith, didn't know about the first vision. I maybe like a naysayer. Well, it just says like two heavenly beings who look like one another. And it doesn't. It's not. It's not the Father and Jesus. It's like the context is well about calling upon the Lord giving them a blessing, wanting an answer from God. There's no mention that these are angels, or at least could angels have been in the vision? Sure, but like these two personages who interacted with him directly, it's clearly the Father and Son.
Yeah,
because he's cognizant of the first vision, like James 1:5, religious turmoil, 15th year, not so 1820, not 1823, and also other things is like to claim well, just because he doesn't mention it's the Father and Son, so we can doubt it. I mean, that's I'll be blunt, that's just stupid apologetic. So I think it would just be more intellectually.
Really
Orson didn't know about the first vision in 1842 here.
Yeah, no, even being objective, even if you're a critic, you can't dispute this passage and say, oh no, he didn't believe it was the Father and Son. It's pretty apparent.
So this kind of brings up the because in your video, and you do raise like what he says in Journal Discourses 6335. So what about the following? And then this is like the Brigham Young, like yes, Brigham Young said this, but he said a bunch of other things. So someone may say, if this work of the last days be true, why did not the Savior come himself to communicate this intelligence to the world? Because of the angels who was committed the power of reaping the earth, and it was committed to none else. So like usually I'm not saying you're a critic, but like say when you present the critical perspective on your video, and others have as well, they say, well, it seems like Orson Hyde here, April 6th in 1854, just 12 years after this tract came out in German, by the way, he seems to preclude that Jesus ever directly interacted in this dispensation in a direct revelatory way. Would that be like a fair summary of the
no, they would see it as why did not the Savior come to communicate intelligence to the world? So if just reading this quote at face value, that's probably how your takeaway.
Sure, but first of all, it kind of begs the question, like we have this explicit scene in 1842 where I don't care who you are, he clearly is talking about the Father and Son appearing in 1820. So what happened? And I think could it be Orson may have slipped up or something like that? It's possible, but I think a better explanation actually comes if one actually reads the context of the journal discourses. Um, you know, this comes from parable of the sower, etc. And the parable of the sower, of course, is in Matthew 13. The 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold, and so on and so forth. It's a parable, even if you're biblically illiterate, you've heard of anyway. So he actually began the sermon by quoting Matthew 13, this parable itself. On page 334, and the above quote just comes from the page previously, 335. There's a time, brethren and sisters, when the harvest of the world must be gathered. For you recollect among the wonderful visions John saw on the Isle of Patmos, and this is important, he's appealing to the book of Revelation. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like a son of man, which is Jesus, Daniel 7, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Trust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. It appears that there is not only to be a gathering of the wheat, but of the tares also, and that they are to be separated. So that just comes from the page previously to the quote. So this is the context of what's happening. It's the exposition of Matthew 13, the parable of the sower, but he also brings up the book of Revelation, the revelation of John on Patmos. So if you read the book of Revelation, God works, when it comes to judgment, to use a fancy term, eschatological or end times judgment and diseases and stuff like that, cursing and stuff like that for the sinners on the world. He doesn't do it directly, he actually does it through the intermediate, through angels. He gives them vials, to cast on the earth and stuff like that. If you read the book of Revelation, for instance, Revelation 15, verse 7 to 16, 1. And one of the four beasts gave unto the seven angels 7 golden vials, full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever, and the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your way and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. So this is an example of God working through angels, not directly himself, right, of meting out judgment or harvesting, if you will. So what Orson, especially because he actually does explicitly say he's getting this from the book of Revelation as well as Matthew, it seems to be it's the harvesting that's in view here, not the first vision or establishing this last dispensation. So he also says
harvesting is in sort of bringing souls onto Christ, or
yeah, and of course God does that. God can do that directly, but he often works through missionaries or angels. So it's that context that's in view here, bringing people the gospel, but also judgment and stuff like that as well. And again, Orson does say he's actually borrowing this idea or getting these ideas from the book of Revelation, where you actually have these angel intermediary figures where God is working through them, not directly but indirectly, if you will, to bring about his will. And he also asks, when was the time of sowing? When we take a more extensive view of the subject, we find that the grand harvest is reserved until the last, until the winding up scene, for it is said, quote, The harvest is at the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels, by whose agency this reaping dispensation was committed to the children of men. And that's on pages 334 and 335. 335, of course, being the quote that's used. And that's said immediately prior to quoting Crasson. And then he also says, Someone may ask, if this work of the last days be true, why did not the Savior come himself to communicate this intelligence to the world? But this intelligence is not about the dispensation or restoration of the gospel, it's about the harvesting. That's the context here. Because the angels was committed to the power of reaping the earth, and was committed to none else. So it's about reaping the earth here. And after the mighty champions that hold the keys of this dispensation came and brought forth the intelligence at the time of the harvest was now, that the time of the end was drawn near. When the proclamation was made and the announcement saluted the ears of the children of men, what was to be done next? Behold, the gathering of the saints begins. That very moment a man or woman embraces the gospel in these latter times, they began to see and understand by the Spirit of truth. The first thing they think of is, we must go and see the prophet of God and learn the ways of the Lord from his lips. What is it that causes this desire in the hearts of the people? It is the spirit of gathering together, for wherever we went, when first this gospel was sent to the nations and proclaiming the glad tidings. Really bad eyesight, so I have to screen a bit. The first thing those who were awakened by our preaching would say, we want to go to the headquarters to run together. These were the feelings of the people common to the circle, and my acquaintance and experience. That's the quote with fuller context. So
that's a lot of good context.
Yeah, so Fair actually has a pretty good discussion on this on their page. Was Orson Hyde unaware of the details of the Father and Son appearing to Joseph in the first vision, where they kind of go through like the background of section 110 and Matthew 13. But even proceeding from that, Orson didn't know about the first vision in 1842. I think that's incontrovertible. So on the face value of things, just like taking that one passage, it does seem like what's going on here. But if you read, like, he appeals to Matthew 13 explicitly at the beginning. He also appeals to the book of Revelation, and Revelation is full of God working through angels for like judgment and other things like that. And also this very context, what is in view here is not the establishment of the dispensation, but it's more like the harvesting, like the preaching of the gospel and other things like that, that God works through intermediaries. He doesn't do it, although he can, he doesn't do it directly. But it's not about like the establishment of the dispensation or precluding the first vision. And as we know previously, from 12 years earlier, not later, but earlier, he explicitly taught the first vision. And he's also in an environment, as we've seen, where the first vision was talked about quite often.
Yeah, so if that's what he meant, he would be outright contradicting himself by writing about the first vision 12 years.
And also the context fits this perspective better than Orson is unaware of the first vision.
Yeah. No, that's really important context and insights to that.
Anything you want to add to that before we can go on
to Oliver Cowdery? No.
Okay, well, really it's good. Oliver Cowdery, and then we'll end with Lucy and William Smith. Now, do you want to give the TLDR version of Oliver Cowdery?
Yeah, so I believe this comes from the Messenger and Advocate. So I think he says in September 1823 that Joseph Smith was praying. I think he says in his account both for forgiveness of sins and being right with God, to know if a supreme being existed, and also I don't know if he prayed to know which church he should join as well. I can't remember the quote offhand, but I believe the angel appears September 1823 in his room, tells him his sins are forgiven and not to join any of the churches and to keep the commandments. That's sort of my
basically the argument. Yeah, you've done a good job. Basically, the TLDR version is like, it seems like, according to some critics, Oliver believes the first vision, if you will, was Moroni in 1823. He's unaware of the 1820 first vision, if you will.
Yeah. Would you say, I think I've even read quotes of historians, BYU professors, that probably most likely in the 1820s and maybe early 1830s he hadn't really told many people about his first vision, and that might be why they're conflating things.
Yeah, I don't believe for a second this is the case for Oliver, and I'll explain why, but I do believe that may be the case, like and maybe we can explain that like in the next section afterwards. But I believe he would have understood it originally as a personal experience, because there were many other people claiming to have seen visions and stuff like that. I think Bushman and others have written about that, and they've done a good job. So an appearance like, say, God and or Jesus was not unique per se.
There was quite a few other people in his area, in the New York area, that claimed during sort of the revival periods to have visions of God or God and Jesus.
Yeah, so he would have probably just like situated in that context and just viewed it for the most part as like a private affair. It comes out rather explicitly in the 1832 account, although of course the 1832 account is not only a private affair, there's a bit more I think going on there. But be that as it may, it was only later he would have understood the importance of it for the church and on a global level, but also theologically as well. I kind of know, like, some think when Joseph went into the woods and see God and Jesus, he knew all about God, like embodiment and stuff like that. It's like, you can find in the first vision, but like Joseph's understanding of its importance would have grown and developed. He may have just viewed it as a vision, but not a theological triastis or something like that, because like in the present world, whenever God appears bodily, and maybe in a future show when we discuss can man see God according to the Bible, whenever God appears in bodily form, they would say, well, that's just an appearance of God in bodily form to communicate, but in his essential nature, he doesn't actually have form. He just does that as a way to condescend to the person, to speak to them.
That's probably how they would interpret like Stephen's vision of seeing God and on his right hand, before he's stoned. I actually did a wee video on Can Man See God on my channel as well.
We definitely should discuss that. And because that's torturous interpretation of Act 7. But yeah, it's rather common. But yeah, Oliver Cowdery. This might be a bit lengthy, but it does kind of show, like, I have to color code this to make sense. But maybe it's just my OCD mind. But
it helps.
Yeah. before I begin, I think it's rather clear when you look at the evidence. Oliver is saying he's working from records, and one of these records was the 1832 account of the first vision. He actually knew about the 1832 account of the first vision, so he's actually in the original letters using this as one of the records to discuss with Phelps, W. Phelps, the editor of the Messenger and Advocate, the early history of the church.
Because he wrote this 2 years after the 1832 account.
Yeah, 1834. Mm-hmm. So, basically I'm going to argue Oliver did have knowledge of the 1832 history, and it's like the first vision is not tucked away in a footnote, it's explicit. So, if you had the first vision account of the 1832 account, if he had the 1832 history, he had the first vision, there's no way he could have missed it. It's not like, say, tucked away in like a subtle footnote or something like that. It's rather explicit there for a few pages. So, and I'll also explain why there's a shift from 1820 to 1823. I think like Roger Nicholson has done a good job on this, but he basically opens up October 1834. Our brother Joseph Smith Jr. has offered to assist us. Indeed, there are many items connected with the fore part of the subject that render his labour indispensable. With his labour and with authentic documents now in our possession, we hope to render this a pleasing and agreeable narrative, well worth the examination and perusal of the saints. So Oliver Q. Phelps says, Joseph has been helpful. We have authentic documents. And my argument, and this is not new to me, like Matthew Brown, Roger Nicholson, and others have argued, one of these authentic records is the 1832 history, which of course includes the 1832 first vision account. Right. So evidence of this, in his letter, December 1834, page 42, Oliver writes the following: "You will recollect that I informed you in my letter published in the first number of the Messenger and Advocate that this history would necessarily embrace the life and character of our esteemed friend and brother Joseph Smith Jr., one of the presidents of this church, and for information on that part of the subject, I refer you to his communication of the same, published in this paper. I shall therefore pass over till I come to the 15th year of his life." So, 1820 here. "A general struggle was made by the leading characters of the different sects for proselytes, or converts. Then strife seemed to take the place of the apparent union and harmony which I had previously characterized the moves and exhortations of the old professors in cry, 'I am right, you're wrong,' was introduced in their stead." So that's Oliver. Similar verbiage is actually found in the 1832 account. "My intimate acquaintance with those of different denominations led me to marvel exceedingly, for I discovered that they do not adorn their profession by holy walk and godly conversation." A similar parallel, again in the same issue. This is Oliver. "In this general strife for followers, his mother, one sister, and two of his natural brothers were persuaded to unite with the Presbyterians. This gave opportunity for further reflection, and as we will be seen in the sequel, laid a foundation, or was one means of laying a foundation for the attestation of the truths, or professions of truth, contained in that record called the Word of God." And also elsewhere on page 43, "After Sean's solicitations to unite with one of those different societies, and seen the apparent proselyting disposition manifested with equal warmth from each, his mind was led to more seriously contemplate the importance of a move of this kind. To profess godliness without its benign influence upon the heart was a thing so foreign from his feelings that his spirit was not at rest day or night." And this is actually, verbiage for this is again found in the 1832 history.
So do you think he's getting this from the 1832 account of Joseph Smith?
He's clearly influenced directly by this, because like in this here, I'm just going to use the abbreviation JS 1832. "When I considered upon these things, my heart exclaimed, well hath the wise man said, it is a fool that said in his heart there is no God. My heart exclaims, all these bear testimony and bespeak an omnipotent and omnipresent power, a being who makes laws and decrees, binds all things in their bounds, who fills eternity, who was and is and will be from all eternity to all eternity." Another, Cowdery, page 43, "To unite with a society professing to be built upon the only sure foundation, and that profession be a vain one, was calculated in its very nature, the more it was contemplated, the more to arouse the mind to the serious consequences of moving hastily in a course fraught with eternal realities." And this is the 1832 Joseph Smith history. "My mind becoming exceedingly distressed, for I became convicted in my sins, and by searching the scriptures I found that mankind did not come unto the Lord, but that they had apostatized from the true living faith. There's no society or denomination that built upon the gospel of Jesus Christ, as recorded in the New Testament, and I felt to mourn for my own sins and for the sins of the world." And in the follow-up letter, Oliver alludes to the first vision, an event that is presented as being prior to Moroni's visitation. This is page 78 of the February 1835 issue. "This most assuredly was correct. It was right. The Lord has said long since, and his word remains steadfast, that for him who knocks it shall be opened, and whosoever will may come and partake of the waters of life freely." Oliver Cowdery's use of with a joy unspeakable was used by Joseph Smith in the 1835 First Vision account. The Lord never said, "Come," and this is "Come unto me, all ye that labor heavy laden, and will give you rest, to turn a deaf ear to those who are weary. When they call upon me, he never said by the mouth of the prophet, Lo, everyone that thirsts, come ye to the waters, without passing it as a firm decree. At the same time that he should after come be filled with a joy unspeakable." And compared to the 1835 First Vision account, "A pillar of fire appeared above my head, it presently rested upon me and filled me with a joy unspeakable." And the 1832 First Vision account has joy used only once to describe Joseph's emotions after the first vision. "My soul was filled with love, and for many days I could rejoice with great joy, and the Lord was with me." There's other routines as well. One other final parallel, describing the events between 1820, the first vision, and 1823, moralized visitation. Oliver wrote concerning Joseph, "On the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, previous return to rest, our brother's mind was unusually wrought upon on a subject which had so long agitated his mind. His heart was drawn out in fervent prayer, and his whole soul was so lost to everything of a temporal nature that earth to him had lost its claims, and all he desired was to be prepared in heart to commune with some kind of messenger who could communicate to him the desired information of his acceptance with God, while continuing in prayer for a manifestation in some way that his sins were forgiven, endeavoring to exercise faith in the scriptures. On a sudden, a light like that of day, only of a pure and far more glorious appearance and brightness, burst into the room." And the 1832 First Vision account, "I fell into transgressions and sinned in many things, which brought a wound upon my soul, and there were many things which transpired that cannot be written, and my father's family have suffered many persecutions and afflictions. And it came to pass, when I was 17 years of age, I called upon the Lord, and he showed unto me a heavenly vision, for behold, an angel of the Lord came and stood before me." So, in light of all these parallels, and I would say pretty strong evidence that the 1832 First Vision account was one of the authentic records from Joseph Oliver was using, it kind of begs the question: why did Oliver not explicitly mention the first vision?
Yeah, that's one of the questions I have. Maybe you're going to answer this. I also there's questions in my mind, so I'm going to say it now. Why do you think, if Oliver had access to the 1832 account, and so he would have known that if he read the account that the Lord appears to Joseph, you can dispute, was it God and Jesus or just the Lord he's referring to, but either way, because doesn't it say in that quote in the Messenger and Advocate, Joseph was praying to know if a supreme being existed?
Yeah.
So if he had access to that account and Joseph Smith had already seen the Lord, why do you think Oliver would have inserted that?
Well, I'll answer that. I'll answer the last one first, and then I'll answer the first question by reading from Roger Nicholson. But
Okay.
I've often believed that to be a rhetorical flourish, because if Joseph was praying, of course, it really doubt he was an atheist. He probably knew there was a God. So, it was probably a rhetorical flourish. If there's no God, strike me down. No, I just think, if you take, before and afterwards, it does seem to be a rhetorical flourish. But I'll answer the first question. Maybe we can get back to that.
Yeah.
So why did Oliver not mention the first vision? And this comes from Roger Nicholson's essay, The Cowdery Conundrum, Oliver's aborted attempt to describe Joseph Smith's first vision in 1834 and 1835, published by Interpreter. There's a substantial correlation between Oliver's history and Joseph's 1832 history, which we've seen before, indicating that Oliver had in his possession. The 1832 history most definitely describes the first vision. Why did Oliver give such an accurate description leading up to the first vision, and did not mention the vision itself? Because he actually skips ahead to year 17 and apologizes for it in the next issue. It seems, based upon his efforts to avoid describing the vision in the second installment, that he understood the importance of the event but was not allowed to describe it specifically. One possibility is that Joseph saw where Oliver was going with the first installment of the story and decided that he was not ready to have Oliver introduce the story of the first vision publicly. At this time, the story of Moroni's visit and the coming forward of the Book of Mormon was already well known among church membership. It would be expected this event be included. There's clearly no reason for him to have skipped such an important foundational event in the prophet's life unless the prophet requested it of him. By 1835, Joseph was clearly relating the story of the first vision to others, but the story of the first vision would not become formally published until several years later, and he concludes with, prior to the discovery of Joseph's 1832 history and 1835 journal entries, Oliver's unusual 1834-1835 account had been used by critics as evidence that Joseph made up the story of the first vision, since when the two installments are considered together, it appears that Oliver's relaying the religious excitement to Moroni's visit. It has been claimed that Joseph did not solidify the details of the first vision story until 1838 in order to establish himself more firmly as a prophet during a church leadership crisis in Kirtland. However, a careful look at Oliver's history in conjunction with Joseph's 1832 and 1835 account shows that Oliver was quite consistent with the details. Oliver appears knew more than he was allowed to write at the time. So it seems like Joseph did not want the first vision to be publicly announced without his say-so. So again, like if you read the accounts and like the stuff mentioned previously, it does seem like the 1832 first vision account was one of the records Oliver was working from. And if that's the case,
because
he knew about the first vision.
Parallels in sort of like the language and the wording that he uses, and he describes some of the similar things during that time period, but then he skips the vision, which I suppose it's speculation, like there's no evidence of it, but then you would think, why else would he
but there's actually
mentioned it?
There are like pretty good, strong textual parallels between Oliver's account and the 1832 account.
Yes, yeah, I think he showed that.
Even like, say, they mentioned a jai, which is a rare word in the 1832 account, being used in the context of the first vision itself, and then like unspeakable jai, which fits like 1835 and Oliver's account as well. So,
right, yeah. Well.
So it just
So I was just gonna say, so Roger Nicholson says that the only explanation he can think of for why Oliver wouldn't have included Joseph Smith's first vision is that Joseph Smith must have told him to not.
Because it's clear, like if you read the earlier, it's like Oliver, starting at 1820 leading up to it, kind of borrows a lot of the stuff from the 1832 account leading up to the first vision. So it seems like Joseph did not want it to be publicly announced for whatever reason. But again, like you have it mentioned in 1835, you also have it in 1832, and if the 1832 account is one of the authentic records, and I think like a good case can be made, and it's been made by Roger Nicholson, it's been made by Matthew, the late Matthew Brown, it's been made by a couple of others as well. If you had access to the 1832 first vision account, of all the possible interpretations or explanations of what's going on here, the conflation account just doesn't work.
Right. No, that's very good. This is new to me. I didn't realize that he would have had access to his 1832 account when he was writing this.
And also, I just mentioned this in passing. It's not explicit, but like in a letter he Phelps, the editor, wrote to his wife Sally, June 2nd, 1835. He mentions like how President Smith, i.e. Joseph, preached last Sabbath and gave him the text, "This is my beloved son, hear ye him." A rather important text for the first vision. He preached one of the greatest sermons I ever heard. It was about 3.5 hours long and unfolded more mysteries than I can write at this time. And Phelps just doesn't elaborate on it. So I'm not saying this is evidence of the first vision or anything like that, but it does seem like rather interesting. Only a few months later, in June 1835, Joseph is given the sermon based on "This is my beloved son, hear ye him," when at a time when he's mentioning the first vision, and Phelps just mentions, it's the greatest sermon ever, 3.5 hours long. I just kind of wish there was some other record of this, to actually see.
It seems to be implying to the first vision, because "This is my beloved son, hear ye him." I don't know what else could be the context.
Yeah, because around this time he's pretty open, more and more open about the theophany he appeared in 1820. So could it be like the first vision? We'll never know, and unfortunately Phelps just doesn't. He says like 3.5 hours long, and that's it. It's like, come on, dude.
And this is just me speculating, but he sounds like, he's unfolding more mystery. So it maybe sounds like it might have been new to him. No, that's just speculation, but maybe it was like, unfolding of mysteries to him.
Yeah,
so
but what's interesting, like, this is from like June of 1835, so not too long after Oliver's interaction and letters that were published. So we're not talking about like, say, miles down the timeline. It's only a matter of months, really. Okay, so any questions on that before I kind of go on to the last section?
Nope.
Okay, William, I'm going to deal with Lucy Mack Smith and William Smith. Personally, I do believe like they do conflate the first vision of 1820 with the first vision of Moroni in 1823. I think the evidence for that is overwhelming. So I think there's an explanation for this, largely because for them and for many early LES, the first vision was Moroni's visitation in September 1823. Once Joseph was more public about the first vision in 1820, it resulted in the conflation.
Yeah.
So that's the TLDR version, but let me just kind of go through like some of this stuff. Now, I'll deal with Lucy first. She wrote a letter to Solomon Mack Jr., January 6, 1831. That could be an allusion to the 1832 account. I'm not persuaded, but it could be. Joseph, after repenting of his sins and humbling himself before God, was visited by an holy angel, whose countenance was like lightning and whose garment was white above all whiteness, who gave him commandments which inspired him from on high, and who gave unto him by means of which were before prepared, that he should translate the book. And it's clear about the angel and stuff like that, but someone would claim the mention of from on high, that could be an allusion to the first vision. Compared to the 1832 first vision account, I felt to mourn for my own sins. The Lord said during the first vision, thy sins are forgiven thee. And after many days I fell into transgressions and many tains. I called upon the Lord, and he showed unto me a heavenly vision. For behold, an angel of the Lord came and stood before me. The Lord had prepared spectacles for me to read. The book thereof I commenced translating into characters. And section 20, verses 5 to 8. We've read that previously, so I won't.
It's very similar to that passage, the first.
Yeah, so it seems like she's conflating things. It seems like she may have been familiar with some of the themes of the 1820 first vision account and some of the themes of the angel, but maybe it's a conflation, or maybe she only knew in 1831 about the angel and did not really know too much about a theophany and stuff like that. However, Lucy, like William, as we'll see below, did clearly conflate the first vision, the Father and Son, with Moroni's first visitation. This comes from page 10, book 3 of her memoirs, which she dictated. After we ceased conversation, he went to bed and was pondering his mind in which of the churches were the true one. But he had not laid there long till he saw a bright light enter the room where he lay. He looked up and saw an angel of the Lord stood or standing by him. The angel spoke, I perceive that you are inquiring in your mind, which is a true church. There is not a true church on earth. No, not one, nor and has there been since Peter took the keys on the Melchizedek priesthood after the order of the Son of God into the kingdom of heaven. The churches that are now upon the earth are all man-made churches. So there's some themes of the 1820 account, which church should die and so on and so forth, but there seems to be conflation of the angel as well in 1823. So
yeah, because she talks about laying in his room and the angel appearing in his room, that's what happened in September 1823. She doesn't talk about him going to a grove of trees, but I think William does in one of his accounts. He talks about him going to a grove of trees.
Yeah, but he conflates that as well. But again, like Lucy, page 6, book 9. But what was my joy and astonishment to hear my own son, though by 14 years of age, declared that he had been visited by an angel. So 1820, but angel here, from heaven. Even at the time, as I took a retrospective glance at former years when my mind was rested upon the hours which I had spent in listening to the instructions which Joseph had received, and which he faithfully committed to us, which we received with infinite delight, but none were more engaged than that one whom we were doomed to part with for Alvin. So this is after Alvin died, so after 1823, was not so happy as when he was contemplating the final success of his brother in obtaining the record. And now I fancied I could hear him with his parting breath conjuring his brother to continue faithful that he might obtain the prize which the Lord had promised him. So Lucy puts this, she mentions Joseph is 14 years of age, so late 1819, 1820. But again, Alvin, who died in 1823, and the angel, it seems like she may have been familiar with the first vision, but at this time, how old would she have been? She would have been 67, 68, I believe. So there might be some issues about old age, but she clearly, at the very least, is conflating things here. And
interesting, because I think in my video, the quote I had of Lucy Smith, she talked about the vision being September 1823, so Joseph would have been 17. But in this quote,
I think she does mention elsewhere, she actually puts it in September 1823 as well. So
perhaps she's getting a bit confused over the dates then.
Yeah. And Lavina Fielding Anderson, one of the September 6, I will note, in her book, Lucy's Book, a critical edition of Lucy Mack Smith's family memoirs, she has a note on page 141, note 40, where in the minutes of Lucy Smith's October 1845 General Conference address, she gives the date of Joseph's receiving the plates as 22nd of September 1827. It was 18 years ago, last 22nd of September, but continues, it is 18 years since I began to receive the gospel of God tidings to all people. This sequence suggests that she considered the Book of Mormon and not the first vision to mark the beginning of the restoration. So all throughout there's a conflation. So when it comes to Brigham et al., clearly did know about the first vision. I think it's rather explicit. When it comes to Lucy, I think an honest LDS apologist would say for her the first vision was Mormon's visitation. She may have only learned about the first vision of 1820 later, but she was conflating things in her dictated memoirs and other things like that. I think that's the best approach.
and I think the implication would be, well, I know in Joseph's 1838 account after his vision, he goes home and his mom asks him like, "Is all well?" or "Are you okay?" And he's like, "All is well. You know, I've learned for myself Presbyterianism is not true." But I, I, I don't think maybe that's all he told his family, and he didn't tell them about his 1820 vision of the Father and the Son.
Yeah,
But he did tell them about
that's my view
Moroni.
as well. For him,
Yeah,
again, it would be like more a private affair, and only later in his life it developed, and he understood the global importance of it, as opposed to just the personal importance. And the same
because
with
you
terms of
think he would
William.
have told her probably in that moment, you know, had she have asked, or maybe soon after. Okay.
Well, he was. If you read her memoirs, he was pretty explicit about the angel appearing and other visions. He may have just kept the first vision to himself because he thought it was a private affair. It seems like when he shared it with a few other people, he was condemned because Presbyterians historically are what's called cessationists. They don't believe in the spiritual gifts, let alone visions in the latter days and stuff like that. So he wouldn't be he wouldn't fit in like in the very Calvinistic idea of like say revelation and stuff like that. You know, so
Yeah, and the account with Moroni, isn't it in the 1838 account? Moroni tells him to go tell his father
yeah,
as well.
yeah. After
That
he
may be
after
why they're
Moroni, yeah,
aware.
yeah. So yeah, so there's other considerations. I think there's explanations as to why this is the case, but she's clearly conflating things. I don't think there's
Yeah.
any wiggle room about this. And the same when it comes to William Smith. I'll be brief, but the best treatment on this is actually Eldon J. Watson, who's an expert on the sermons of Brigham Young. The William Smith accounts of Joseph Smith's first vision from 1999 on his website. He basically argues that William, when he's writing like the 1870s and 1880s, he's clearly conflating the first vision of 1820 with Moroni's visitation all throughout, like William Smith of Mormonism and these other works as well. I'll just quote him here. The third William Smith account, and he goes through the other William Smith accounts as well in the essay, is a report of a discourse which he delivered in a church meeting in Detroit, Iowa, June 8, 1804, so well into old age. The account conforms in most specifics with the earlier and longer 1883 accounts, which Watson dealt with as well. In his discourse, William related, "It must be remembered that just before the angel appeared to Joseph, there was an unusual revival in the neighborhood. It spread from town to town, from city to city, from county to county, and from state to state. My mother attended these meetings, and being much concerned about the spiritual welfare of the family, she persuaded them to attend the meetings. Finally, my mother, one sister, my brothers Samuel and Hiram became Presbyterians. Joseph and myself did not join. I had not sown all my wild oats. At the close of these meetings, the different ministers began to beat around and see how many converts they could get to join in their respective churches. All said, 'Come and join us. We are right. Where's the gospel of Christ? Where's the church of Christ? There's a lost gospel. There's a lost church.'" And then he kind of goes on and on and on. But basically, he conflates 1820 with 1823. And this actually has led some, like, say, Vogel and Marquardt and Walters to argue that these are witnesses that the revival, was actually 1823, 1824. I think Michael Quinn has done a very good refutation of that, of all people, but, he does clearly conflate things. And then Watson concludes, on the morning of September 22nd, 1823, after being so directed by the angel, Joseph called his family together and related them his vision and experiences of the previous evening with Moroni, an angel sent to him from God. 12-year-old William Smith was there with the rest of his family as Joseph explained the events of Moroni's visit of the evening of September 21st, 1823. It appears that prior to this time, Joseph had not related to his family his initial visionary experience of some 3.5 years earlier, in which he saw both God the Father and Jesus Christ. It would also appear from the published text of an interview by Reverend Murdoch that William was unaware of Joseph's first vision as distinct from his visitation by the angel Moroni as late as 1841. But prior to 1841, of course, like, loads of people were discussing the first vision independent of Moroni, as we've seen here, like Orson Pratt, Orson Hyde, etc.
Yeah.
William superimposed in his mind the accounts of these two distinct visitations, and in all of his subsequent life, he never adequately distinguished between them. When in his declining years, William related accounts of Joseph's first vision. He intertwined in his narrative events from both visions and depicted them as though they had been a single event. Ascribing undue authority to William Smith's statements in interpreting Joseph Smith's own personal accounts has caused some to find inconsistencies in LDS church history, Tanners, Marquardt, et al. The most apparent of these is the transporting of Reverends Lane and Stockton into Palmyra in the period of Joseph Smith's 1820 first vision, when in fact they did not arrive upon the scene until the 1823 timeframe. Something even LDS apologists have been guilty of. Joseph Smith never mentioned either of these two Protestant ministers by name, and William Smith should not have, at least in relation to his brother's first vision. So I think that's the best explanation as to what's going on.
Yeah.
There's a conflation, but it's not, well, Joseph was making crap up as he went along, and you see this with William. It's like, no, first vision for most LDS in the early years was Moroni's visitation. It was only later Joseph, recognizing the importance of the 1820 vision, understood its importance, and that became the first vision. You know,
Did William and Lucy, did they follow Brigham Young to Utah?
no, William was
No.
all over the place. He joined various churches like McLellan's group and other groups as well, and they kept kicking him out. They wanted to give him authority because he was the church patriarch, I believe, for a while of the mainstream church and things like that. But he wandered all over the place. Lucy remained with the Saints, and she was with the then reorganized church after.
That's right.
Or at least she remained there. I forget when she died, but like the reorganized church was like the 1860s, so I think she died beforehand.
But by the late 1830s, or certainly the early 1840s, when the official version was publicized and published, they would have been aware of him seeing the Father and the Son, but they're just conflating the
well, I don't
events.
know. Well, that's the thing. I don't know what Lucy read, but at the same time, it's clear, presenting from like Lucy and William, the first vision, Father and Son, or at least two heavenly beings, who's not the angel Moroni in 1820, was being discussed and presented.
Yeah, because one thing that stood out to me, whenever you actually read their accounts, that they actually contradict each other. Because Lucy says it was the angel appearing to him in his room, but William says it was the angel appearing to him, but in the grove of trees, 1823. But then in one of Lucy's accounts, she says when he was 14. So there's actually a lot of contradictions in their accounts.
Yeah, and I think it's due to, I don't think they were like fudging things deliberately. I just believe that it's because of sincerity. For William, again, he would have, his early days, first vision was Moroni, then later he would have conflated the two, especially later in his age. I think the same thing is going on with Lucy, Conflation, as a result of initially believing the first vision was Moroni. Because as Anderson noted, like for Lucy, when she's dictating her memoirs in 1844, 1845, the singular point of the beginning of the Restoration was actually the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But funny enough, you don't actually have these inconsistencies when it comes to Brigham, Orson, and others.
No,
these are the issues you would expect if the critics are correct about Brigham and Orson and others. But you don't have that. But you do have it here. As I said, like I'm more than willing to concede these are conflations. And these are the more problematic ones, but I think they can be explained away, especially, and I don't think it's consistent with like, Joseph came up with the first vision way late and it wasn't an issue, just like, because you have contemporary accounts like Orson and others clearly explicating it,
And I think there's this assumption that Joseph Smith, after his first vision, would have went home, would have written in his journal straight away and would have told his family, I saw the Father and the Son.
I would have loved that was the case, but unfortunately that's not the case. And it does seem like it was a private affair. He may have told others, but he would have been shot down. Because, yes, like in some groups of the time, like the religious seekers and stuff like that, they, especially like the Shakers and others, they did believe like the ongoing gifts of the Spirit and some type of public revelation, like the sacred book and roll of the Shakers and things like that. But for, like, say, the more refined American Protestants of the time, like the Churches of Christ, the Restorationist movement, or the Presbyterians, if you read the Westminster Confession of Faith, not only did not believe in public revelation or the cessation of, say, visions, most did not even believe in the cessation of speaking in tongues or other of the other gifts as well. They were full-blown cessationists. So I think Joseph was going against the grain if he did share it with others. Because like he did say like how he tried to share it with like a minister, but the minister who was a Methodist, so theologically they would be closer to like later Mormonism than Calvinism. Because Mormonism has been described quite rightly as basically Arminianism on steroids. He was basically shot down, and like there's no such thing as visions and stuff like that. Public revelation ceased with the death of the last apostle, the very sola scriptura assumptions of Protestantism at the time. Even with some of the more radical groups like the Churches of Christ by Campbell.
Yeah. Okay. Damn. Well, that was a really good, thorough, I think, objective analysis, which is what I want on my channel, and providing all the context and quotes that go against it. And so I think in summary, it's very clear that the early church leaders like Brigham Young, John Taylor, Orson Pratt, Orson Hyde knew and talked about the visitation of the Father and the Son for the first vision. Oliver Cowdery was most likely aware of the 1832 account, but perhaps was told not to write about it in the 1834 Messenger and Advocate. But there's parallels in the language that he was borrowing from the 1832 account.
And he does explicitly state in the very first place he's using authentic records, and he mentions Joseph Smith being helpful for it. So I if Oliver did have access to the 1832 account, that's the critical interpretation blown out of the water.
Yeah, yeah. And then with William and Lucy, most likely conflation. They weren't aware about the visitation of the Father and the Son. Their belief of the first vision was the angel
Well,
Moroni.
they wouldn't have known about it straight away, but like they may have been familiar with it, but because like tradition and stuff like that, and like old age and stuff like that, they definitely did
Yeah,
conflate.
yeah.
So
No, that's grand. I know you said if time permitted to maybe look at some other things. Do you want to leave it there for today? Do you want
yeah,
to take a
maybe
break and do
maybe I
another
think maybe a
part?
good thing to discuss would be like maybe purported inconsistencies, but also maybe either in the same episode or a follow up episode, scriptural teachings on can man see God?
Yeah, yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah, because funny enough, like I've been looking at this issue for years. Like one of my favorite topics is discussing not just Christology, but like the number and nature of God, like embodiment and what does image and likeness mean in Hebrew and stuff like that. You even have like Trinitarian scholars saying, if we argue God the Father cannot be seen, you have a problem with the Trinity because Jesus is is the same being as God the Father, different person but same being. He's consubstantial with the Father. So
Yeah.
how could people see the premortal Jesus before the incarnation, taking on flesh, but not the Father? Is there you would have to go against the Trinity there, and even like some scholars like Andrew Malone saying, it's a problem to say it's only you can only claim Jesus appeared in the Old Testament. The Father did appear as well, and some of these texts that we've used to claim that the Father is intrinsically invisible don't hold up. You have like a swart of like even Trinitarian scholars who would probably think Mormonism's an evil religion and a false gospel and we're going to hell. When they're not addressing Mormonism, it's like dudes like John 1:18 and John 6, they don't mean you can't see God. They just can't mean you can't behold God for a very long period of time or, enjoy his presence. So I think that would be like maybe a fun discussion for either an individual episode or an inconsistencies episode as well.
Yeah,
Because that's
merging
often
it
raised by
together.
evangelicals. What does 1 Timothy 6:16 mean and stuff like that. So
Yeah, yeah. No, that'll be awesome. So
yeah,
we can either take a break or we'll do that as another episode another time.
yeah, would happy to do
Awesome.
that. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll close it if you've got nothing else to say on that, but I think that was very thorough.
Yeah, it's just like if anything, it kind of shows the importance of going to the sources. Like the journal discourses, they're online on the the Harold B. Lee Special Collections Library. If you want scans, I have like a set myself. The green books there. That's them. But when it comes to the first vision, at the very least, and this is not addressed to you. I know you've done this, but like people listening, josephsmithpapers.org. You can go through all the different accounts. They've been published as well in the book Opening the Heavens, which actually has a very good essay harmonizing the different accounts as well. Also a website, and I'm a little biased when it comes to this, but there's this group called the B.H. Roberts Foundation. Not only do we post very good memes on the Mormonr Instagram page and Twitter, but if you go on mormonr.org, that's Mormon with an or.org, you can go to an article briefly addressing like various issues about the first vision, but also a primary resources page where you can go to like and see scans of say Joseph Smith's accounts of the first vision and scans of some of the pages of the journal discourses and Brigham Young and all discussing the first vision and other relevant topics. And I work for them, so I say there's other issues as well that are addressed as well. So that would be a very good, and it's accessible and it's for
resource.
Free, so
that's awesome. Yeah, we'll have to put those links in the description. And you as well, like you're a scholar, you've got so much knowledge of the wider context. So I think if people have any questions about this topic with the first vision, that you're a good source to go to as well. You can direct them, places to check out this article, read this book, see what this guy has to say,
sure.
Provide that fuller context.
And also not related to the first vision per se, but my blog as well, scripturalmormonism.blogspot.com,
yes,
where I discuss mainly biblical exegesis and Latter-day Saint theology and other things as well.
So check out his blog, Scriptural Mormonism. He's also got a YouTube channel, which I believe is also called Scriptural Mormonism. So go check out his channel.
And just speaking about the nature of God, this Thursday I will be having an interview with Blake Ostler, because we both have a similar reading of the Kinfola Discourse and Sermon on the Grove. So we'll be responding to criticisms, all of that. So
awesome. So check that interview out then. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Robert. Thanks everyone so much for joining. And I will see you next time. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Put some comments underneath if you have any questions or any comments you want to give. Share this video with other people. We're trying to be fair and objective, to look both sides of the argument and to present the evidence. And if you want to support me, you can through my PayPal, stephen.murphy1996 at outlook.com, to keep these great episodes going. Thanks so much, Robert.
My pleasure. It's been fun.